guy Nick Spone, and you've all operated fairly well on Zoom, and you've enjoyed it. And last week, several stayed till well past 9:30, just talking to Ron and Scott. I'm always going to be the last one out the door because I'm mindful that this is a stressful time. I'm very aware of many co-ops being retracted. Sometimes job offer starts being pushed out well into the summer when you had planned a May or June start. So there's lots of uncertainty in our lives, in all of our lives. And if you feel you want to chat about that or kick some ideas around, you can email me, you can um, text me, and I always stay to the very end. I'm the last one out, and I'll hit the turn out the lights button so you guys can get going. Are there any questions before we get started? We still have several that are being admitted, got about 120 now. So any questions particularly? I'll invite you just to unmute your mic and ask the question, I think. We've got a chat box question. Um,
I guess here, Greg. So
yeah, go ahead,
basically,
Pete.
what
Yeah,
my
Chris.
question was: so for the journals, so for the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership, obviously those notes we take. But you said there's 2 more speakers. The journal being due next class.
Yeah.
Do you want us to turn it in before class?
I'm going to give you a lot of grace on this for 2 or 3 reasons. Number one, nobody's taken advantage of it. Number two, the vast majority of you guys are seniors. Number 3, you're all showing up and you're doing what you're supposed to do. I mean, out of 135, got 121, and we're still admitting them. So I'm going to just defer to your discretion. Obviously, when I want them turned in that evening and the following Wednesday, if we go that direction, will not be included. We'll take a reasonable person approach to those journals. Is that everybody okay with that? Give me a thumbs up if you're okay. You got the message. Thanks, gang. Okay, so we've got about 15 people short, and they will continue to show up. I'm going to get right into things and make this a valuable time together, as I pledged I would do back in the 1st of January. I'm really disappointed that we're not in person, because if we were in person, we'd have such a good time interacting and just enjoying each other's company, such as we would have last week with Rich or with Scott and Ron. But tonight, I am really honored to have a friend, an old high school classmate, um, and I just consider Rich a down-to-earth friend. I admire him so much, and I know he's probably going to turn red as I share. But we've got Rich Boehne with us, who is a recently retired CEO with Scripps. Some of you might not be familiar with the brand name Scripps, but they've got a ginormous and gorgeous office building downtown with their name splattered all over it. And WCPO Channel 9 is probably one of their assets that you're most familiar with. They own that station and a few dozen in addition to that. The reason I invited Rich is not simply because of the status he achieved, but the road that he took to get there. He started his career selling subscriptions for the Cincinnati Post while he was a kid in high school. By the way, he and I both went to Highlands High School. It's a bedroom community right across the river from Cincinnati and up on the hill. And Highlands High School is the school we attended. He graduated there. He started working as the Inquirer as a part-time reporter. His bachelor's degree was fraught with some dry holes, some detours, and some dead ends. And he's going to tell you a little bit about, how do you end up in a janitor's closet in a YMCA and then go to the C-suite at Scripps? How do you get kicked out of a school a couple of times and end up being on its board of regents in years later, and a very, very generous benefactor to that school? So Rich Boehne is there. He's living in Northern Kentucky. He's the most down-to-earth CEO I've ever met. He's always casual. I don't think I've ever seen him in a tie, and seldom anything other than what you see there, a sport coat or a sweater and an open collar shirt. And he's a wonderful man. He's a generous man. He's smart, but his journey has a lot of patina on it. And I think that what we've asked Rich to come here and share his life story with, and to do life with us on Wednesday night, I want you to listen very closely, because a lot of the things that he's been through, you either will be through or you have been through. And I want you to get not only some good golden nuggets from our time tonight, but I want you to get some encouragement and some inspiration from his story. So, Paul, if you'll continue to let the crowd in here, I'm going to turn things over to my good friend, Rich Boehne. Rich, take it away.
Hi. Hey, Greg. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming in on Zoom. Probably like many of you, I am already really sick of Zoom. 2 or 3 times a day, sitting on Zoom, acting like I'm paying attention when most of the time I'm not. That's much easier to do when you're, oh, hold on. Let me change my view. All right. That's a lot easier to do, I think, when you're sitting in the room around a table or in an auditorium like you guys usually do. People sort of go on about their business. But for some reason on Zoom, everybody feels like they have to sit and go like this and act completely interested the whole time, which is I'm finding really difficult to do. So yeah, I put on a collar shirt tonight for the Greg show just to be a little bit more formal. I'm going to take a little bit of time and talk about how I ended up CEO of a large company. As Greg said, today I'm chairman of the Scripps Company, chair of the board. Scripps is one of the original old media companies, been in the journalism business for a long, long time. Today we own, 40 or 50 TV stations. We also own a young millennial news network called Newsy. Hopefully you've heard of Newsy, N-E-W-S, N-E-W-S-Y-Y-S, Newsy. Either on your smartphone or on cable or streaming, however you like to watch. And it's doing really, really well. We're also one of the largest podcast companies in the country, own a number of the podcast brands that you're probably familiar with. And we do a few other things on the side. We own the National Spelling Bee, and have been in the spelling bee business really as just a charity for many, many years. We do that we run it as a nonprofit inside the company. 10 or 11 million kids start out, and we end up with that one, or last year, was it 6 kids in Washington where we ended up with at the last minute. For the first time in 75 years, other than 1 year during the Second World War, we're not going to have the finals on ESPN like we have in the past, which is really too bad. So I grew up did a lot of my work at Scripps, which we'll talk about. I'm chair of that board today. I'm vice chair of the Associated Press, which is the most extensive news organization in the world, and an incredible organization. If the AP is not one of your news sources, I really urge you to go onto your smartphone and get the AP app and see what it's like watching the news as it's actually generated each day, not just talked about by a number of the other brands, but the AP really generates content and news content from around the world and has for many years. In addition, we count all the votes in the elections. So when an election is called and you hear Missouri has been called for so-and-so, or anything is called, we do that at the AP out of our New York headquarters. And for me, being in the news business, to be a member and vice chair of the Associated Press is an incredible honor. Later on, if anybody wants to, we can talk about the news industry. It had to wear a t-shirt that said fake news on it, that would be me. As chairman of Scripps and a leader at the Associated Press, I'm right in the middle of the news industry each and every day, and it's the wildest time I have ever been through in the news industry in my very long career for all kinds of reasons, which I'm happy to talk about. And then finally, I'm immediate past chair of the board at Northern Kentucky University, where I graduated. And as I told some of your folks a couple years ago, I absolutely love NKU and UC, the public universities in this region. These are the people's universities. I mean, we attract at NKU and UC the best and brightest people who had incredible choices, who could go to school anywhere in the country, many places in the world, decided to come to UC or NKU. We also have room for first-generation students. About half of our students at NKU are first-generation college students. When they walk across that stage, they'll be the first in their families to ever get a college degree, as I was. And it's just an incredible honor to serve them. non-traditional students, people who deserve a second chance or want to change direction of their career later in life. Those are the people that we take care of at the good public universities like UC and NKU. I could not be more proud. I'm probably more proud of my involvement in public higher ed at these people's universities than I am almost anything else I do. And I certainly hope UC has played out to be everything that you all hope for, and I'm sure it has. And I hope none of you are soccer players. I read that story today. If so, I'm really sorry. So as Greg said, we went to the same high school. He was a little more of an achiever than I was. Starting around, I don't know, age 15 or 16, I lost my way in high school. As later as counselors would say to me, what was your problem? Why did you get involved in all this bad activity in high school? It's because you're insecure, or were you depressed, or why would you do these things? Why would you let your life get off the rails like I did? I said, well, I think it was just fun. I really don't know. It wasn't. I come from a great family. I'm like I said, I'm a first generation college student, but my parents are bright, hard workers. Come from immigrant families and country families, and I could not have anything to complain about family-wise. But for some reason, I got myself into, as I say, got completely off the rails late in high school and sort of limped my way out of Highlands High School, which is such a good high school that even though I limped my way out and did very little the last couple of years, I still got an awfully good education that benefited me later in life. So I thought about a lot of schools and ended up at Northern Kentucky University, where I promptly, ended up on probation my first semester. Not unheard of, especially with a lot of young men. As I often tell people, 18-year-old men are like a bottle rocket with a broken stick. You light it and you never know where in the hell it's going to go, right? And that's exactly what my experience was. So, they sort of gave me the bad grades, let me come back. And then after my second semester, I promptly failed my way out, flunked out of school. They decided it'd be a good idea if I took a little bit of time off. That certainly would have been a good idea since I was doing next to nothing in school. Took a little time off, worked, drove a truck, worked at a blood lab, did all kinds of things, came back. And unfortunately, my routine was pretty much the same. Got booted out for a third time, or booted out completely at that point. And at that point, though, I was starting to get a little bit worried. I thought I was intelligent, but for some reason, I just couldn't make college work. I had a very hard time getting stuff from head to paper or from head to expression. And I think today I would probably be tested and put on some sort of plan. And we didn't do that as much back in those days. And I had to work through those kind of challenges on my own. So finally, I moved away. I thought I needed a change of environment. Some of you have probably been through that, where you thought, I just need a change of environment. I had wonderful friends who were leading me into all kinds of terrible things. And I just did not have the willpower to say no. So I took a job in Florida and moved to Fort Myers, Florida for a while, and to sort of, rethink the world and see if I could get back on track. As Greg said, during that journey, I was, let's make sure this is not, at one point during that period, I was, when I really kind of hit bottom, I was a custodian at a YMCA. Nothing wrong with being a custodian at a YMCA. I can tell you, there were plenty of days when I was a CEO of a large company when I would have rather been a custodian at a YMCA. It would have been a whole lot simpler than what I was doing. But at that point, I was into my early mid-20s and working as a custodian and, with that mop, looking in the mirror, thinking, wow, you've made a terrible mess of your life, flunked out of colleges, had other kinds of issues swirling around you, and how am I going to get myself back together? If you've had that tumble in your life, and I'm sure some of you had, you really for a long time feel like, well, what I've done is not that bad. I can recover. I can recover. I can recover. And hopefully you have not had to be at that point where you think there's no easy recovery from here. I have to way back through my problems and get my life back together. My dream was to be a journalist. I've been just a news fan since I was a kid. I have here in my office, just on my left, I have pages that I tore out of newspapers when I was a kid. One of them is all about protecting reporters' rights and free speech and the free press. I took that out of a newspaper when I was about 12 or 13 years old. It still hangs on the wall of my office today and is a real inspiration to me. So I wanted to get back in the game, even though I had been kicked out, had all kinds of problems. I knew I needed a bachelor's degree in order to be a journalist. In most news organizations, we really don't mind what your degree is in. And in many cases today, we encourage people to get degrees other than journalism, major in biology and minor in journalism, so that you bring some subject matter expert to the craft that we all do for a living. But I needed a bachelor's degree, so that meant I had to get my way back into school and somehow get out. The problem I had is nobody would admit me. In Florida, some schools would let me take classes, but they would not admit me based on, I had like a 0.72 average, something like that. If you've ever had a 0.72 average, it's a heck of a hole to have to dig out of. And they would all look at my transcripts and say, it'd just be best if you take your routine somewhere else. So they would admit me in Florida. I had previous problems also briefly at the University of Kentucky. And so it looked like the only way was to go back to where I started, back to Northern Kentucky University, which I did on my knees and begged and said, look, I tell you, I have grown up this time. I really need one more chance. Here's what I want to do with my life. And I need a bachelor's degree. And I promise I'll do it this time. So there was a young admissions officer, pretty new, and he listened to my story and looked at me and an academic agreement that pretty much said that should I fall into the kind of disrepair I had in the past, I had no right to ever darken the door of the university again. And that was just fine. So I started over. I repeated failed classes for quite a while. I was on probation. At that point, I had figured out my learning style. As I said, I struggled quite a lot. We got later into high school, and I had to understand what my learning style is. For example, I can't memorize. I could never be in a school play. I sang in a benefit a couple years ago in a rock and roll benefit show, and it was really hard and made me very nervous to think about having to actually memorize the lyrics of just 2 songs. That's just not one of my skill sets. But after I learned my learning style, and I assume many of you have many different learning styles, and I really encourage you to trust in your learning style and have faith in it, and don't feel like that you've got to just fall into line and learn like everybody else. Too many people get off track and never recover just because there's an assumption that there's only one way to learn, only one way to get ahead, only one way to put it together. And there's really not. There are a whole lot of different ways. So after I developed my own learning style, got a hold of it, I made straight A's at NKU. And as I said, I made straight A's while I was reporting, while I was repeating failed classes. So I was on probation, the dean's list, all at the same time. It was really a crazy kind of episode. I took as many classes as they would let me. And at the same time, I worked as a reporter on the side. And as soon as I got to, I think I needed a 2.92 average to graduate. The minute I crossed that mark, I applied for graduation and got out. It was a fantastic experience. And as Greg and I have often talked about, that early failure that I went through seemed painful and perplexing at the time. I really knew I could do it, but just somehow I couldn't make it work, and other temptations took over. But that early failure has really made a huge difference in my life. I'm very thankful for it. And I often worry about people who have had no failure in their lives. And we can talk about that later when we talk about how I built my team at Scripps and the kind of people I looked for and the role that failure played in that. So I finished at NKU the night I graduated in 1981. I had a job offered a newspaper, so I walked the stage, got my diploma, and went straight to work. Some of you are probably thinking about, oh, I was hoping before all this to spend a summer in Europe or do something like that. Unfortunately, I walked right off the stage and right into a job because I had that opportunity and there was no way I was going to let that loose. So I spent the next 8 years as a working journalist. An incredible craft. I hope some of you have had exposure to journalism. I know many of you are in other fields, but journalism, you get to see the incredible highs and the horrible lows that exist in this world. Most of you and most people really spend their life in a very narrow band, and they just don't see what goes on above and below the sort of the stage where you play. Journalists get to see just the most ugly, desperate, unbelievable things on both ends of the spectrum. Just selfishness beyond belief, selfishness and wealth and craziness on one end, egos, and on the other end, people who do incredible things. I often, sometimes when I speak to journalism students, they say, tell us about some of the interviews you've had. Well, you know, I've had the opportunity to interview presidents. I was a reporter on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. I did a lot of writing on insider trading and things like that. But probably the interviews that I most appreciated, or today I think about the most, was when you sit across, almost knees knocking, with somebody who has committed incredible, horrible murders and done things that seem almost just not even human. And that opportunity to just look into somebody's eyes and wonder what motivated this person to do those things. It was sort of that glimpse of the world that I think that influenced me much more than the times that I got to sit and talk to presidents, the United States, or all kinds of other people that journalists get to meet. So I was a working journalist for about 8 years, and covering I got it from Scripps. There was a 100-plus-year-old family company deciding to go public for reasons of controlling ownership by allowing other family members to get out if they wanted to. And I said, I don't know, working at a corporate office. I mean, I'm a journalist, you know. I'm making $35,000 a year. I'm not sure I would want to come inside of a corporate office and work with a bunch of suits. But I thought it looked intriguing. And one of the things that has really marked my career, I've taken many, many chances with my career. I've changed direction. I've never hesitated to seek out different kinds of opportunities. And I have absolutely loved being in a business that's not linear in any way. In our business, you can move side to side, up and down, all over the place. There's no linear track for people in the media business. You really have to make your own way and be an entrepreneur, and I like that quite a lot. So I joined the Scripps corporate staff in 1988. We took the company public, which was absolutely fantastic. A great experience helping a very private organization become a very public organization and work with analysts and portfolio managers. Many of the people who I had experience working with when I was a reporter covering the capital markets. By the way, my academic strength was always math. And when I was a student, I took not just strictly a journalism track, but I also loved economics. I still love economics. Took some finance, took some accounting, and widening out my experience in school made a huge difference in my career. There were so many people in my field that didn't have enough finance background to cover business and economics, and that turned into great opportunity for me. Was another example of when I saw and looked and thought, how can I widen my lens a little bit and create other choices and opportunities for myself down the road. So I joined the Scripps corporate staff, great corporation, very mission-minded, been in the media business for many, many years. I came in sort of a defined role, helping the company be a public company. And then quickly I signed up for all kinds of other things. Ended up on a strategic planning group. And also, I took on everything that other people didn't want to do. I was kind of coming from behind, trying to figure out how do I build my career, and often sitting at that table where the CEO is asking who would be willing to take on something ugly. And when other people were looking at their shoes or acting like they were taking notes, I would often raise my hand and say, yeah, I would love to do that. And that really made a huge difference in my career, being willing to do things that other people thought were either below them, or sometimes they thought they were career enders. And I saw an opportunity to turn it into a real benefit. So, for example, I spent over a year dealing with a Teamsters strike in Pittsburgh. Scripps owned a very large Pittsburgh newspaper. It was at the time a huge newspaper. The Teamsters really ran it. You should know I'm not anti-union in any way. I used to be a union member as a writer. I was a member of the Writers Guild. But in this case, the Teamsters pretty much owned the place. And if you can imagine, in some cases, we're making $80,000 a year in the 90s to deliver a newspaper. Now, that's good eating if you can get that kind of work. But it was quickly putting the newspaper under. It's hard to imagine today, but newspapers were huge businesses. You could have a newspaper in a market, a city the size of Pittsburgh or Cincinnati, Kansas City, Indianapolis, Columbus. In cities of that size, a newspaper could cash flow $100 million a year. Cash flow profit, $100 million a year, one newspaper in one city in America. It was a very large, very profitable, very powerful industry at the time. But we had problems in Pittsburgh, and it was the kind of thing nobody wanted to deal with. I signed on as part of the crisis team, and then spent quite a long time among a group of managers getting our butts absolutely kicked by the Teamsters in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The Teamsters shut down the newspaper for a year, surrounded the building many times with picketers, also steel workers, everybody else. I spent many, many weeks inside the building, sometimes calling home. I had 2 small children at the time, and I would call my wife on a Thursday or a Friday and say, I can't stay in for the weekend, stay on my cot. But by the time I got there, the place was a mess, and nobody was winning. The company and the lawyers were determined that we were in the right, which we probably were, running an unprofitable newspaper. By the way, part of my job was to try to go out in the community and build support for our position. I once got heckled off the stage speaking to a group of priests, trying to convince them show them that the newspaper is unprofitable. We just, we don't want to get rid of anybody who has a job today. We just somehow over long term need to change the structure of this business. And they heckled me off the stage yelling, our town, our jobs, our town, our jobs, and didn't even let me finish my spiel. It was really a great experience. At one point during the strike, we decided to go to court and ask for an injunction to allow us to print and publish the newspaper. The judge decided that for whatever reason we didn't deserve to get the injunction and publish. A few days later, we tried to publish the newspaper while no one was looking in Canada and truck it down into Pittsburgh and deliver it. We ran the presses so people would think that the paper was trying to be produced. Strikers surrounded the building. At one point, I looked out a window. By the way, I was crawling through the building because rocks and ball bearings and everything else were coming through the windows. I'm crawling along on the floor, looking out through the corner of windows and watching this scene go on in the street. And it was one of the most incredible moments in my career. I was in my 30s. I looked out this window at this just absolute riot, trucks burning, absolute mess. And I thought, if I am ever in a position of influence in any organization, I'll never let anything come to this. It was just a mess. And everybody was determined they were in the right, and everybody lost. We ended up selling the business and leaving town. The business got in further trouble. The Teamsters didn't come out of it well. It was just an absolute, total, complete mess. And it changed my career forever. thinking that you have to deal with problems up front and early, and don't ever let things come to that kind of situation. It was just really, really terrible. I did that. I worked in California. We were a very large cable television operator. We were building cable systems. California is a difficult place for regulation. So I spent a lot of time at the State House in California trying to explain, why we were building these cable systems the way we were, why you build some communities now, some other, why you charge this and not that. Why no, I'm just not sure we can have 10 or 15 Chinese language channels on our cable system in California, when at the time we only have 50 channels to deal with. And it was all fantastic experience. Nothing I was specifically trained for, but it was the kind of battle duty that made a huge difference in me understanding how to negotiate, how to work with people, how to understand the needs of people on the other side of the table who see the world in a very different way than I did as a kid from Kentucky, now suddenly plunged into the California State House, trying to figure out regulation and where we go from here. So I did all kinds of those things. I took on stuff that nobody wanted to do and sort of built my portfolio at Scripps. And as I say, ended up as part of a strategic planning group. It was fantastic. Then one of my very best friends who worked just down the hall from me, who was a DJ at the time, had come out of the radio division of our company and moved to the corporate office doing a marketing job. He came down the hall one day and said, "Hey, I have an idea for a cable network about homes and gardens." And I said, "Ken, cable TV 24 hours a day, grass growing and paint drying, you've got to be out of your mind. Who's ever going to watch that?" Now, it's hard to imagine. This is in the 1990s, when there was very little programming that was specialized like you see on TV today. Media was very general. ABC, NBC, CBS, everybody carried all kinds of different programming. Cable television had originally been built because reception was lousy in a lot of parts of the community. You just couldn't get good stuff off the antenna like you can today in a digital world. So that we ran wire all over the country so that you could get better reception. Sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, people started to think, wait a minute, you could also start to niche TV. And then along came CNN, HGTV, Food Network, and all the others that built the television that really many of you see today. It was not like that at all back then. So when Ken Lowe from Pilot Mountain, North Carolina, came down the hall and said, "What do you think about homes and gardens?" And we all just laughed our butts off and thought it was the craziest thing we'd ever heard of. So we went to his basement and we ate chicken out of a bucket and drank beer and watched his presentation for what would become Home and Garden Television. And his pitch was fantastic. He had a great idea. He was one of those guys, he still remains one of my very closest friends, who can see around corners, very creative. He could anticipate trends, and he was way ahead on that. He understood that that home and garden, especially home, was a place where a real brand could be built. So went to the company, went to the CEO. He was, I don't know, guys, homes and gardens. I said, "Ken's got a great idea." CEO was not overly enthusiastic at first. Let us make a pitch to the board of directors. The board liked the pitch and allowed us to spend $25 million and another $25 million if it went okay from there.
Let me interrupt you for a minute,
Sure.
Rich. How old were you at that point?
Let's see, how old, that was 1983. I was born in 56. So how old was I? 63, 76.
35 years old.
35 years old,
36,
something like that. Yeah, and Ken was about 5 years older than I am. And we had another friend, a guy named Frank Gardner, who many of you would not know, but you could find him. He was a CBS correspondent, and he's the reporter who told the nation that Martin Luther King was dead, reporting out of Memphis. Also worked at Scripps, and the three of us have been great friends for many, many years.
So tell us a little bit about, I think it's important, it's a leadership development class, when you have that moment, and it's a window of time, a fleeting opportunity
Yeah.
A couple of things. Tell us about the weekend you spent in his basement with flip charts, cold chicken and beer, and then tell
Yeah.
us about what the key. How did you decide what to pitch to a $25 million holder, if you will?
Yeah, and just a reminder, in our business, in the media business, 25 or $50 million is not a lot of money.
Right.
That's a pretty affordable startup. Ken, again, what he emphasized in the pitch was not so much what we would put on the screen, but what's going on in the society around us. At the time, Lowe's and Home Depot were just starting. The hardware stores were consolidating. And there was much more attention paid to home than there had been in the past. It's really hard to imagine what a different world really that Greg and I grew up in when you think of homes. Much smaller square footage, much fewer features than you see in homes today. Those of us who grew up after the Second World War, home was a different kind of place than it became and as it is today. I'll give you one example. Ken had really studied the furniture industry. And remember, he did this as a side. He didn't come out of this business. It was just an interest he had. Furniture for years was something you bought once or you inherited from your grandmother, a cherry table and and a chest, and you put it in your dining room and you had it until you gave it to your kids, and it just passed generation. Starting in about the 1980s, the furniture industry really started to change. And people started to think, why would I be stuck with the same furniture my whole life? And furniture became much more of a fashion statement. That may not be at all interesting to you all. It was fascinating to me, the work he had done around furniture, about all kinds of trends in the industry, and what that was going to look like in the future. The most amazing part of his pitch, this is a little hard to imagine today. This is 1983. This is really pre-internet. Really way ahead of broad deployment of the internet. He was talking about interactivity, and he talked about how we would develop HGTV in a way that it would connect with people, and as he always said, it would tell you when you needed to change your furnace filter. That was an incredibly radical idea. We laughed. I laughed so hard. I said, Ken, TV when to change your furnace filter? What Ken was anticipating back then was the smart economy, the connected economy that we see today, the one that dominates so much of what we do, and he could see it then. We built a affinity club, so you could have an HGTV membership card, and we had discounts. And so we built a social media structure around the network at the time. And the other thing we did was after lunch, built a phone room, and if you saw anything on the screen on HGTV, you could call somebody and say, hey, I was watching this show on this night. They would look up the episode, and they would tell you where that lamp came from. Things that today we take for granted. I mean, this is Amazon or home design software that today dominates the industry, but was very, very new then.
And by the way, my math was wrong. You were in your late 20s. These guys are in their early 20s. And you had had a lot of failures, and but that moment came quickly and suddenly, and you saw it.
The one thing that I think is really important here, I grew up in a lower middle class family. By that point, what did you say, Greg? I'd been a journalist. I'd worked on Wall Street. I was making what I thought was decent money. And I was always willing to put my career at risk. I had small kids at the time, but I thought I can earn a living. I'm sure I can support my family. And so many times from then on, I was always willing to take a risk. I had a good job. Actually, when I sort of stepped away from my job and was focused very heavily on just these cable networks, my mother-in-law said to me, why are you taking such a risk? You have a good job. You're really exposing yourself. But I thought I can always take care of my family. This looks like a great opportunity and a lot of fun, and an opportunity to help build something and help a guy who had a great idea. So really, all I did, I bet my career on my friend's idea, and I've never regretted it. But I never worried about the downside. I mean, how far can you fall? Those of you who are sitting on this line tonight, You're going to have great college degrees, great backgrounds. I doubt you can fall terribly far just because you've taken some risks with your career, and I really hope you do. Is that what you mean, Greg?
Yeah, 100%. I think that a lot of times, we're afraid to take the jump because we're certain we'll crash. And what you're explaining is if it's a calculated risk and not a reckless risk,
Yeah.
more often than not, you'll fly. And if you do fail, you'll learn and you come back and you do it again, or at least have the eyes to see another opportunity. I
Yeah.
think for these guys who are among the coolest class guys I've ever, and gals, I'm using Cincinnati guys term, the coolest students I've ever had, it's really important. I really want to encourage them to learn to see the opportunity and then learn to seize it, even if the risk is a failure is high.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt like I was at cruising altitude, and I wasn't that worried about it. So we at Scripps, we built HGTV. And by the way, I talked to Ken Lowe. And if you ever get a chance to hear Ken Lowe speak or meet with him, he's an incredible human. He and I had a lot in common. We're both from families that grew tobacco, from farm and blue collar families. His dad had a little car lot along a asphalt road in North Carolina. So we had the same lingo. We had the same backgrounds. We worked very, very well together. But I talked him into, I said, look, I have all the connections on Wall Street. If we're going to do a network, let's announce it in New York. I'll pull this crowd together and we'll make this big announcement in New York. The CEO at Scripps at the time got so nervous, he decided he better go along if the company was making this big announcement. And he did, incredibly nervous. So I pulled all these people into a room in a hotel in New York, big crowd, and we announced that Scripps, a longtime newspaper and television company, was going to launch a cable network about homes and gardens. You could look up the Wall Street Journal story about it now. You could hear a pin drop. People called it a green hole. It was terrible. It was awful. And the Wall Street Journal reporter asked me why I thought it went so bad. And I said, I guess I had forgotten that in New York, as a garden is a weed that goes up through cracks that would end up following me for many, many years when we were trying to get business done in New York. And people would say, well, here's what Rich thinks in New York. And it took me forever to try to get away from that quote.
So I think that sort of experience right there, Rich, in your late 20s, oftentimes would be a defining moment to retreat, to go back to Northern Kentucky, to settled for existence. What was it that kept you going? What was it that kept you enthused and motivated, in spite of the disappointment that moment created in your life?
Well,
I think that's where a lot of us retreat.
Yeah, I can't. As we'll probably talk about later, life is is extremely short. And I kind of like the adventure. I can't imagine wasting a single day. So the idea of retreating, I've just never really accepted. I've been beat down a few times and had to recover, but never on my own have I just sort of settled back and thought, I guess I've kind of made it. I'll glide from here and play it safe. I give you an example. We built HGTV, and then a couple years later, a little messy network came up for sale out of New York called the Food Network. And HGTV was not yet profitable. And we went to the board of directors and said, look, we have a strategy around category television, consumer categories, homes, gardens, food makes a whole lot of sense. We want to buy the Food Network. And our board just threw us out, said, you all are crazy. You've got this home and garden thing. It's not making money yet. Now you want to buy another network. And we pitched and pitched. They threw us out. That was a time when I was young and naive and stupid enough to think just because I've been thrown out 3 times doesn't mean I'll be thrown out a 4th. And we kept pushing. And finally, I did a presentation for the Scripps board that showed if we traded this TV station that the other company wanted very bad, that made $40 million a year, for a network that lost $20 million a year, our stock would go way up. And they actually believed it, which is the incredible part of the presentation I made. And finally, the board sent us away many times, a special Sunday morning board meeting. They gave us approval. And I'll tell you what made the big difference that day was we had some of our first women directors on our board. Some of the men directors on our board, you know, they could kind of get home and garden, but they were sort of CNN and ESPN viewers. And we were pitching Food Network, they just didn't get it. And the new diversity in our board made an incredible difference. And we got the backing of our board that morning, and they let us buy the Food Network, which at the time was a little messy, very New York-esque kind of network. We quickly spread it out and changed it so it was much more on location across the country. Took quite a long time, and it lost money for quite a long time, but eventually paid off. And I'm sure some of you probably watch Food Network, and it's turned into, you know, just a really great brand. I'll tell you, when we bought the network, it was based in New York on 6th Avenue in a big building. And we walked in, and apparently they had done some research and thought, oh my gosh, the hillbillies have bought the Food Network. These guys from Kentucky and North Carolina and Tennessee are our new bosses. We walked in. I was so excited. I so wanted that brand. It was going to make such a big difference at Scripps in our portfolio. And they were just looking at us. Nobody was saying anything. We're the new bosses. And finally, I said, look, if you're worried about us interfering, I know that's what you're scared of. You think we're going to interfere. I can tell you we're not going to interfere. Our tastes are very simple. We like it fried. And they didn't think that was funny at all. I mean, they just didn't seem to appreciate where we'd come from and how much we loved them and how much good we would do for the network. And we did. We convinced the company to invest quite a lot of money, and it worked out well. And then after that, Scripps launched DIY and all other networks, and it worked out very well. I got to tell you, if you ever have the opportunity to be part of a startup, to work with something and to get behind something that starts from scratch, what an incredible experience. I got to spend 13, 14 years just heavily focused on the networks at Scripps. And it was just so much fun. And the people that I worked with together, you know, are still my great friends. We're very close. And a lot of it is because of all the stupid, dumb mistakes we made along the way. And luckily we made just a number of, you know, a few good decisions, and we came out of it alive. So built the networks at Scripps. We still had a number of other businesses. The networks grew very quickly and soon began to dominate Scripps. I went to the board and went with Ken Lowe, and we said, we really think we should separate into two companies. After everything we built, it just seemed like that we needed to take the cable networks and let them go in their own direction. I could see at the time we had a problem with our newspapers. We were a very large newspaper operator. And as you can tell today, newspapers are a business that has gone into very serious decline. And we could see that coming. So, you know, the board didn't think it was such a good idea. We kept pitching, kept pushing, and finally they agreed. In 2008, we separated into two companies, Scripps Networks and the E.W. Scripps Company, the mothership. Oh, I should go back. After we had worked on the cable networks for some time, I was really trying to decide what to do next. And I didn't see an opportunity so much at Scripps. I thought that one business, these very large newspapers, had dominated the company. I really didn't want to work in the newspaper business the rest of my career. So I was going to go do something else. I had several very good offers at companies around the country, and my friends at Scripps talked me into staying. And then one day, the board of directors came to us and said, we'd like you all to run the company. So then suddenly, Ken Lowe was the CEO and I was the chief operating officer. They jumped us over 2 or 3 generations of managers and handed us the company. When they came and asked me if I wanted the job and told us about it, I had to go down on it. We were at 4th and Walnut. I had to walk around downtown Cincinnati and try to process what it was going to mean to suddenly run a very large corporation. tried to get hold of my wife to see what she thought, whether I should take this job or not. Couldn't get hold of her. They wanted an answer very quickly, so I went back into the building and said, okay, I guess we'll do it. Later that day, Scripps made an announcement that Ken Lowe and Rich Boehne would have the two top jobs in the company. And I think people in the company just were confused, didn't know what to think. How could you let these guys run the company? But the board sat us down and said, you know, you all are entrepreneurs. You're very risk tolerant. You see a long runway, and you're not afraid to work towards something that's well out in the future. I always tell people I don't at all mind losing battles, but I'm going to win the war. I'm always going to win the war, even if I lose battles along the way. And I think that's what the board at Scripps liked. They thought, you know, these guys are young. They have a lot yet to prove, and let's let them run the company and see what happens. And it turned out.
What were the revenues? What were the gross revenues of the company at the time you took over?
It was a couple billion, around $2 billion.
Wow. So they really took a big risk too, because they had a lot riding on you guys.
Yeah, I think they did. I think they thought they could keep an eye on us. But yeah, they took a big risk. I much credit to the board of Scripps and the Scripps family for investing and taking a chance on us. We really, I can speak for myself, I was not ready. It took me a while to adjust to that level of executive management. Very different. You know, when you work in a business or you have a different kind of role, an awful lot of what you do is outbound. It's your work product that's going somewhere. When you're leading an organization of that size, it's like it's all inbound. It's all just coming at you every day, and it's very hard to find time to stay focused and keep the organization moving forward, and don't let it take you down and take you under. So it was really different.
How old were you at that point, Rich?
I'm sorry?
How old were you at that
point? It was
point?
1999. So what was I, 40 something?
Early 40s, yeah.
Yeah, so they handed the company to a couple of us in our 40s. And just
so how did you manage that age gap? I mean, what about the people who had bought to be?
It was, you know, I think the best part of it was a lot of them came to us and said, you know, you're decent people, and we've worked with you, and we like working with you, and we admire you, and we're very happy for you. So there weren't a lot of hard feelings. There were some hard feelings, and I had a number of people came to me and said, love you, but I'm getting out here. And you know, so I helped some people who were more senior and thought they had another run somewhere else, and helped them find other jobs while we sort of made it up as we went along. The one thing we quickly did, some of it had to do with age, but also who we were. Scripps was a coat and tie, you know, gray suit, white tie, white shirt, red tie, kind of formal place. The media business, we always thought, was based on creativity. So we changed very quickly and turned it into a very casual environment, tore down walls. You know, it used to be at Scripps, the executives had all the offices out on the glass overlooking the river. We tore all the walls down and let everybody look out the windows, not just the executives. Changed the dress code, you know, did everything imaginable. And I think it was maybe a little bit stunning, a little quick. We probably moved a little fast. We happen to be people, I happen to be somebody who enjoys change. And what you quickly learn, and what all of you are going to quickly learn, is that there really aren't that many people who like change. And probably some of you don't like change, and some of you are probably risk averse. And you'll soon find that, you know, if you really can embrace change and embrace risk, you're can be a real leader. But it's not that easy trying to bring an organization around, and we probably fumbled a few times and made some mistakes. So anyway, they gave us the company. A few years later, we said this ought to be two companies. We pitched, they let us separate. Ken Lowe took the networks and did a fabulous job, recently merged that with Discovery just about 2 years ago. And we decided to rebuild the mothership without the networks. So I took over as CEO in July of 2008, and promptly we ended up in a financial meltdown, a worldwide meltdown, which was incredible. It's hard to imagine. It's not that many years ago, and how scary the financial crisis was in 2008. Probably a lot of you who are with us tonight, your parents were probably affected. I'll bet even some of you had to move. Some of your parents probably lost jobs. Some of you probably lost the house you lived in during the financial crisis. It was really, really scary. I think a lot of people just don't realize or remember how close this country was to full financial collapse. So I'm sitting at Scripps having meetings. We met every Saturday to look at our cash position. Many of the banks we did business with were not returning our calls because they were going under. It was really an incredible time to have to try to manage a corporation. We made an awful lot of hard decisions. We cut all of our pay dramatically, cut our pay fast and much deeper than we did the rest of the employees. We froze a pension. We did furloughs. I went to the basement and read the board books from how the company was operated during the Depression in the 1930s. And would go home at night with these board books thinking, what if we have to run this company on 50 or 40% of the revenue that we had today? How are we going to take care of families? How are we going to take care of a pension fund that is supposed to support many of these people for the rest of their lives? It was just incredible. The one thing I really learned during the financial crisis is that a lot of people are just not very sturdy. We had a lot of people in management positions, had good jobs. When we got into that kind of situation, the kind of situation you're in today, they weren't built for it. They weren't sturdy enough. They just couldn't handle the pressure. And a lot of those people just sort of melted away. After the financial crisis at Scripps, we had a great team. They were battle tested. They were tough. They were servants. They knew what it was like to have to put other people's interests before your own. They knew what it was like to really be a leader. And they run the company still today, the people that I turned it over to, and they've just done a fantastic job. I went to some of the folks at Scripps. You always think that you're going to have a once in your career sort of crisis. Something's going to happen once in your career, and it's going to define what you do and how you think about the world. And in just 20 years, I've been through 3. The first one was 9/11, when I was in the number 2 position at Scripps. It's hard to imagine now, but 9/11 was a very scary episode for this country. Some ways similar to what we're going through today, because everything shut down almost overnight. The country just shut down. People were very scared. We had to adjust. We had to somehow deal with people who worked in places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, in 2-story buildings, and were scared to death that somebody was going to fly a plane into their building. And why won't we close? Why won't we just close down? We've got to close. It was really a fascinating period to work through. And then our revenues were off 40%. Our stock went to 87 cents. At one point I'm sitting in an airport in Miami trying to get home. I look up at the screen, there's the afternoon market show on, and I look at the ticker, and there goes the ticker buy, and we're trading at 87 cents. I mean, almost all the value of the company has been wiped out almost overnight. And the worst part of it is, I'm the CEO. I'm supposed to, somehow I got to figure this out and get a company through this, which we did.
Tell us about your emotions at that moment, and what support systems did you rely on? I think all of us at some point in our life, and perhaps in our professional experience, reach that point which just utter terror. Maybe it's a divorce, maybe it's the death of a loved one or a child, or maybe our parent, or maybe it's something as you've described in our business. At that point, what is absolutely essential to survival, Rich?
I think absolutely essential to survival are a couple things. One, having some good friends you can rely on. I never had a mentor. I grew up in a little bit different business. I grew up in a very Wild West sort of industry. And until recently, we didn't have mentoring and networks and people like that. I'm always fascinated. People talk to me about their mentors. So she's my mentor, my something mentor. I never had a mentor. I just had some really good friends, and we plotted our careers together, and we worked together, and we still work together today. And we work through our lives together today. So we were not just colleagues; we were really work colleagues. We were very close friends. But you got to have people that you can be absolutely transparent with. I think even in a professional setting, you got to find some people you can cry with, because there are going to be things happen in your life, and they're just going to make you cry. They're going to make other people cry, and you just got to be able to get through that stuff and be very real.
I think that's a very important point. I want to jump in here. You know, one of the reasons we have people like Rich and Scott and others that'll be here in the next couple of weeks is you've studied now for a number of weeks leadership materials, whether it's the 21 irrefutable laws, it's lectures in class, etc. These guys are showing you leadership in context. What you heard him say is what you've heard us talk about early on is the importance of a caring community, important of where there's 100% honesty, to the grave confidentiality, and no judgment. So important, because when you hit that wall or that crisis experience comes unexpectedly, like seeing your whole company fade away in an airport by yourself, if you don't have that, I think you are at risk of just utter and total failure at that point. It really does take that caring community to lift you and take you on to the next spot. And that's what you just heard Mr. Boehne share.
Yeah, that and I really hope you have jobs where you have a sense of mission. I mean, that at times like that, your sense of mission takes over. Your realization that everybody's looking at you, everybody's relying on you. At Scripps, I always visited our offices and visited with employees, all three shifts. In the media business, we work around the clock. And 2008 and 9 in particular, I would go places and people would come up to me, and hug me and say, "Please, Rich, just tell me everything's going to be okay." And I never would tell them everything was going to be okay. I would tell them we're going to do the best we can. I would tell them to be sure and do the right things for their life. But I think they really appreciated that honesty and transparency. And also at Scripps, we've always been incredibly transparent with employees. That is so important. Many of you are going to work for corporations, and you'll read memos and you'll hear executives talk, and it'll be all gobbledygook. It'll be something that somebody wrote and some lawyer approved, and it's not straight, and it's not telling anybody what they really want to know, and it's not instilling any confidence. We've always tried to be incredibly transparent and straight with employees. My view has always been, I don't own any of these people. I'm not in control of their lives. What they deserve from us is as much information as possible so that they can make the very best decisions for their families. And I really hope when you all are in positions of leadership that you'll be absolutely open and transparent with those with which you're entrusted, because it just makes a big, big difference. So that was, we got through 2008 and 9. We ended up with a great team out of it. We recovered. We built and bought a lot of other businesses. And then a few years later, I convinced the Scripps family and our board to get out of the newspaper business. As we say in our business, that was the one that brought us to the dance. Our very first business was newspapers, but I could see it was going to go under. So we took them out of the company and merged them with another. It was one of those where with Scripps family members, I had to go porch to porch and kitchen to kitchen and barn to barn and say, look, I'm telling you, we really need to do this. I hope you'll trust me. And so we one day took 50% of the employees, or probably 60% of the employees, 50% of the revenue. We took it out of the company and merged it in with a pure newspaper company and decided to start and build from there. And things since then have gone extremely well. But that was another one of those, I could have waited and left that to the person coming after me, but I really felt that I was the one that had to deal with that enormous challenge and secure the future of the company. The other thing, if a leader, you understand, you have to make hard decisions. It was a horrible decision. I met with the publishers and the editors of all of our newspapers. At that point, I don't know if you all follow the newspaper industry. It probably today has 30% of the revenue it had 10 or 15 years ago. It's a really struggling business. And the people who were running our newspapers, they were still vertical. They were still in there despite losing probably half of the revenue. I was incredibly proud of what they had done. And I got them all in a room to tell them that, they were leaving the company. I got about 3 minutes in, I cried, they cried. It was really, really terrible. But in order to do the best for those businesses and to do the best for the rest of the company, it just didn't make sense to subsidize one business. We just had to make a hard decision. And I did, and I also, around the same time, I closed 4 newspapers, including a great newspaper in Denver, Colorado, the Rocky Mountain News, that was losing $20 to $30 million a year.
And tell us about that trip out there to make that announcement. That's one of the things I remember about your presentations in the past, because it was raw, it was real, it was emotional, it was engagement, it was firm, it was risky. Tell us a little bit more about that story, because I think there's some golden nuggets in that, Rich, if you wouldn't mind.
If you all are familiar with Denver, some of you might be in Denver for all I know. The Rocky Mountain News, you had 500,000 people reading the newspaper, very good, but losing a whole lot of money in a newspaper war with another paper, the Denver Post. The Denver Post was owned by somebody locally who just said, look, I'm not economically rational. You're going to lose money forever. I'm just going to continue to spend. So I decided we had to close it. So as Greg said, I worked in and out of that newsroom when I was a journalist. So I took a flight out to Denver. Apparently news had leaked somehow. I got out at the airport, got into a car, and turned on the radio, and on AM radio was hearing a description of Rich Boehne has arrived in Denver. Apparently there's a big announcement coming this morning. Not long after, somebody back in Cincinnati said, hey, you better take a look at this website. There was my picture walking through the Denver airport on my way downtown. So at that point, I drive downtown with one other person from Scripps. When I get to the Rocky Mountain News building, it's surrounded with photographers, and I have to work my way in past all these photographers. Parked in the garage, sat in the garage for about a half hour trying to pull myself together, knowing that I had to go upstairs and put out of work several hundred of the finest journalists who I have ever worked with. And many of them are still incredibly successful journalists and friends of mine. But there was just we just couldn't go on. This is 2009. So, I just said, oh, dear Lord, I cannot cry on national television. So went upstairs, made the announcement, we're going to close the Rocky Mountain News, held a press conference that went on forever. And then I went back into the newspaper and stayed into the evening. Against the advice of our lawyers, our HR people, and our security people, I stood there in the building and let people work through the initial anger and initial surprise. Then, sort of the second wave of it. And then later in the day, spouses and other people showed up. And I went through that as well. And just thought, that's my job. I made this decision. I'm a leader, and I should be willing to put up with this. Many of you, unfortunately, will work for companies where a hard decision is made. Somebody will show up from the corporate office. There'll be a bunch of people surrounding her or him. They'll make some announcement, and then they'll shuffle them out the door. and you'll feel really crappy about the way it went down, and you'll have every right to feel that way. Because people who are in charge and run companies and large organizations should be willing to work through it with people who have been so dramatically affected by the decisions we made. So about 8 o'clock at night, I met with the leadership team about what was going to happen the next couple of days. I got on the elevator, went down, got my car, and just, I don't think I've ever been so tired or stretched, in my entire career. Sometimes I talk at schools and people have reviewed this situation and they, say, how did it make you feel doing it? And I say, what difference does it make how I felt? Who cares how I felt? I still had a job. I had a good income as a CEO. What difference does it make how I felt? What mattered was how hundreds of people who lost their jobs that day, that's really all that matters. Makes no difference how I felt. It was a really, really hard, but again, you all who aspire to be in leadership positions, you're not going to have a career where all you get to do is make fun decisions. You'll have to make difficult decisions. You'll have to talk to people under very difficult circumstances. You're going to have to be willing to be yelled at, second guessed, because that comes with the territory. If you stick your head above the crowd and say, I want to be a leader, you got to be willing to let your head get knocked around a few times, because that's the price of leadership, quite frankly. It's an honor to be, it's a special calling. And those of us who are privileged to do it should understand that everything that comes with it. Yeah. Can we go on a little bit?
Yes, I think I'm just looking at those who do have their video activated and they're glued to you, Rich. And yeah, I don't know about y'all, but I've taken a couple of pages of notes, and in addition to what he said, it's what I felt when he said it, because I think you're seeing a really under the covers look of leadership at the top in a unique way that you won't get anywhere else. I promise you. That's why this time and these times together tonight are just going to be very memorable. I still get people talking about Rich's presentation. So you're out there in Denver, you closed it up. What was it like coming home for you? It was really hard. And then some of you may have been to what was called the Newseum in Washington, D.C., which was a look at, you could go in. So for a long time on a screen about 8 feet tall, there I was closing the Rocky Mountain News on a video loop. And so for years, people would call me and say, hey, I was just in Washington, saw you close the Rocky Mountain News. Just on and on and on. I hope I made the right decision. It had a huge impact on that community as well. But I couldn't ask the rest of our businesses, the rest of our employees to subsidize a business that was going to always lose money. It just wouldn't be fair. That's where you have to make those kind of hard decisions. Terrible, hard, ugly, but at that point, it seemed pretty obvious to me. So let me, so one thing I was going to tell you, so all of us think that there'll be this one thing that happens during our career, and we'll talk about it the rest of our careers. But in just 20 years, in positions of leadership in organizations, 3 times in 20 years, 9/11, the meltdown in 2008, which really was, I think people forget that in 2008 and 9, how close we were to all living in caves and carrying guns. I mean, it was really pretty close to a collapse. And now with what's going on with the virus, this is probably the broadest and strangest crisis I've ever worked through, and we can talk more about that if you all like. But just 3 times inside of 20 years, the organizations that I've worked with have had to go through really big, broad crisis. I pray that you guys don't have to go through any of them in your career,
But you really need to think now and learn from what we're going through and figure out how to be built if you're going to lead organizations to work through situations like this, because it doesn't look like the world's going to change a lot. This won't be the last of these big, broad, wild crises. And your generation's going to have to figure out how to manage these. They just don't go away very quickly.
So coach us for a few minutes, Rich, from your perspective, and we understand it's not gospel, but it's your perspective. And I like to tell these amazing young adults that we've got three things to share, and that's perspectives, the experiences, and the resources of others. How should we be learning from the current crisis? We're in the thick of it. We're on here because of it. We're on Zoom because of, how should coach us how to learn effectively from this? What should we be looking for?
Yeah, the one thing, all of you members of the class, this is, I mean, you're living in an unbelievable case study. This is an incredible opportunity at your age to watch leaders and see what leaders do, because they're all making all kinds of decisions. You know, from Trump to the governors to the World Health Organization, world leaders, they're all making decisions. And history will have the opportunity to judge them for the decisions they've made. But what you can do right now, I think, is be very present and watch how these leaders are making decisions. I'll give you a couple examples. You know, I'm really proud of Ohio's governor, Mike DeWine, and Kentucky's governor, Andy Beshear. They're nerdy. They don't come across like big, strong, huge presence leaders, but they're making really hard decisions. They both moved very quickly in Ohio and Kentucky, and as a result, our numbers are pretty darn good. Now, whether they made the right decisions or wrong decisions, I really don't have any idea. We'll all know in time. But I've been really proud of them as leaders. They've been unafraid to make hard decisions and willing to just let history be the judge of what they do.
And for those of you who may not be aware, because you may not all be from either Ohio or Kentucky, one's a Democrat and one's a Republican.
Yeah.
So it's a nonpartisan statement.
Yeah, no, yeah. And I'm I'm in the media business. I'm an independent. I'll always be an independent. But they're doing it with humility, and they're sort of unafraid. And there's all kinds of people gathering around them saying, "You guys are way too conservative," and you're wrecking all kinds of other things. I don't know if we're not very well, but I think you're really seeing leaders there. And if you watch them, they're mission-minded. Their heart's in the right place. They're humble and they're unafraid. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. The other end of the spectrum, I think, is the president, who, and I'm not talking about the decisions. He's making decisions, right? And we'll all know in the future whether the decisions are right or not. But he has a very hard time separating himself personally from all the chaos and the noise. He spent most of a press conference the other day just defending his position versus the New York Times. I'm not sure that's the best use of a leader's airtime,
If you were to coach him today, if he were to call you to the White House and coach him, given your experience, what are the 2 or 3 things that you would invite him to consider?
Well, I would tell him, first and foremost, it's not about you. You already have the top job in the whole world. It's now about everybody else. It's not about you. You asked for this job. People gave it to you. You're now entrusted with hundreds of millions of people, millions of families. It's not about you. And don't worry about all the noise around you. Just let it bounce off and go on. Make good decisions and hope you do the right thing, and try to comfort the nation, and don't quibble. Now, obviously, I'm in the media business. I'm in the news business. I don't people can call me fake news. They can call us anything we want. I really don't mind that at all. Everybody's using their free speech. I think free speech is fantastic, including on college campuses where it's largely under threat these days. But I would just say, look, man, you earned it. You got a big job. The whole world's looking at you. Just, it's not about you. Don't worry about it. Just go on. I'm not sure he's capable of doing that. I pray that he's making all the right decisions. I mean, I really hope he does, because we're all counting on him too.
You know, the one thing I get from that and is the importance of humility in a leader's style.
Yeah.
Whether you're a three-piece suit or whether you're a collared shirt and sweater, what I think is more important is humility, and I think that word's often misunderstood. It's not about being some doormat for people just to take advantage and wipe dirt on you. Give us your definition of humility, Rich, and do you find that as a value, a key value in the personality characteristics of leadership?
I think humility is defining for real leaders. If you think about your very best leaders, they all had some sense of humility about them. They all realize that they're fragile. They're not that terribly important, actually. They're here very temporarily, and that you just can't start thinking that it's all about you. I think humility is so powerful. Leaders who walk the halls and make other people feel special, I mean, that's just a gift, and and what you get back for that, I mean, it's just incredible. So I think humility makes a huge difference. I don't know. I would like to think I'm humble, but if I am, it's really just because I realize I'm not that terribly important. And I'll be done soon, and it just doesn't matter that much.
Talk to us a little bit about the power of diversity. You mentioned it early on when you're dealing with the Food Network. You mentioned it last year as well. How can we, you and I were born in Dennis the Menaceville, the Brady Bunch, My Three Sons, Dennis the Menace. Any of those shows could have been filmed in our town. You know that
Sure.
To a large degree, it's still the same. How can we create diversity of thought, and what kind of diversity do you feel is important in our lives that give us that extra perspective that helps us make better decisions? Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to start with, and you're seeing it right now with what's happening with the virus. This is an incredible connected world. Everybody's just almost adjacent to one another in the world today with the way we travel and the way products flow. It's just a very diverse world. America is going to be an unbelievably diverse country in a very short period of time. So the one thing just to realize is, it's a jumbled up salad bowl world, and we might as well embrace it and take advantage of it. Also, I really do push diversity of thought. I've just been very lucky to work in an industry where you can be whatever you are. Places like Scripps, you can be whatever you want to be in the workplace. People talk very openly. I really sort of grieve that in many organizations today, people cannot talk openly and freely with one another. That somehow we've pushed it into some zone where people really can't explore what other people are about. It's not seen as acceptable. Many times they get you in trouble. And I really think that's too bad. I'm just blessed to come from a business where you can be really anything you are and be proud and open about it. So I do think diversity of thought is incredibly important, and not thought that is only born of gender or non-gender or race or ethnic background, but all kinds of diversity of thought. We're just so intolerant of diversity of thought today. I really hope that your generation can sort this out and not make it such a world where it's so black and white on each end of the spectrum. Really, I think America is a hard place to be today unless you're so comfortable falling into the into the left or well into the right. It's very hard to try to cross over those groups and enjoy and appreciate some diversity of thought.
Hey, Rich. So I'm curious, kind of moving off of that. You know, you went from being a janitor to being the CEO of a very large company worth billions. You've mentioned things along the lines of taking on jobs that might be a little risky that you don't like, or taking on those risks. What do you think moving into our, you know, first year in some major companies? What are some things that we can do to kind of stand out and be that guy? You know, if we aspire to be a CEO, if we aspire to be a president, how should we stand ourselves apart from the others, and how should we you know, operate in those new companies and try to, you know, improve ourselves?
Yeah, well, one, it's going to be fairly easy to do, because an awful lot of the people that are coming in, you know, out of that new class, are going to be fairly cookie cutter. They're going to be convinced that there's only one way to success. They're all going to try to look alike and sound alike. They're all going to suck up to the same people. So I think really the way to stand out is to, one, be yourself, be who you are, and be the person who is always willing to take on a risk and take on the things that others don't want to do. You quickly pick up on who is risk tolerant, who's creative, and who is just, you know, got some expectation that I'll be this for 2 years, and then 2 years later I'll do this, and then they'll move me to this, and then I'll move to here, and unwilling to risk any failure. It won't take long at all to stand out if you're willing to take risks and be a little different. The other thing I'd urge you to do is look kind of broadly. You know, you may see opportunities that don't look quite like what you were thinking. The company might be a little different. Maybe it's new and entrepreneurial. Maybe there's a little more risk around it. But maybe it's not quite the company you were thinking, but yet your opportunity is broader. You can do more than just go into some very large corporation in a very narrow position. You know, when you're young, that opportunity to pick up all kinds of other skills, in addition to just the technical skills that you bring to the job, I think that's a great opportunity. If you go into some of these big companies, you won't have an opportunity to be a leader or a manager for a long time. There are other kinds of companies where you might have much more broader opportunity much quicker. And if it doesn't work out, you know, go back to the other side, do something different. Don't worry so much about it.
Let me interrupt the dialogue and the way this power, and we've set a ways to go. 133 out of 140ish or so people here. Thank you for that. Rich, number one, we want to be good hosts. Do you need a bio break or whatnot?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I'll do then?
I was going to say I have a bucket under my that wouldn't be very.
In the interest of time, what I'll invite you to do is, if you do need a bio break for the class, just, you know, excuse yourself and take care of business, and come on back. But I think that we want to get as much juice out of this orange as we can tonight. So I'm going to keep going. Rich, I want to turn the presentation back over to you. I hope we didn't sidetrack you with some Q&A,
No.
which we're going to get to, and that'll be a big part of our time tonight. So you talked about coming back home after the Rocky Mountain Press experience, and you talked about the need for humility and being there as part of the job, and to be thick-skinned and tender-hearted and cry with your inner circle when the time calls for it. But talk to us about mid-career or late career, and perhaps even transitioning the reins, passing the torch to the new guys. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I just turned 64, so I think of myself as fairly young. I went to the Scripps board in 2000, I guess 16 or 15, and said, you know what, we should start thinking about transition. They said, oh my gosh, you're so young. Why would you ever want to do that? And I said, yeah, but I've been in a position where my decisions have guided this corporation. I've been part of a the senior team for 20 plus years. And I just think it's time that we start to look ahead, much like we did when they gave the reins to myself and Ken Lowe in our 40s. I thought it was important to transition out at that point. So we'll go back, but to get to the end of the story, the new CEO of Scripps, I hope some of you have met him. His name is Adam Simpson. He's in his 40s. He started as an investigative reporter. And then I moved him around to a number of different positions. He's one of those that like risk. He had a very good job in our television division. I asked him to move to our new digital businesses. We had a group of digital businesses at the time. And would he be willing to step out of his job and go over there and become part of the management team? Several of those businesses just out and out failed. And, we wrote off at Scripps about $1 billion in bad businesses. I wrote off $1 billion in bad decisions. Luckily, we made a number of good decisions and built an awful lot of value. But he was part of the businesses that ultimately failed, and we ended up writing off. Hard to do, but again, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to accept that at times it's not going to work. You just got to make sure you hit more than you miss. But so he did that, and then I talked to the board and I said, I think I think he's the next CEO. Here, what was really cool, I guess I can say this, we had 5 sort of candidates we were looking at. Only one was a kind of a later career white male. And it wasn't because we sat back and said, let's have a diverse pool of candidates for CEO. We had just done, I think, a pretty good job of building a diverse operation and corporation, and the candidates, it's just sort of the way it came out, which seems to be the way it should come out, I guess. Mm-hmm. So Adam took over. Like I said, he's in his 40s. And he's doing a good job. And I moved. They asked me to stay as chairman of the company, and and I've had the opportunity to work directly quite a bit with Adam and with the next management team. The transition was fine. I miss it most, to be honest, at moments like this. The last 2 big crisis situations that we went through, I was in the most senior position. And as chairman, I'm one removed. And so quite often, some days I feel kind of useless. I'm a member of the board and we're being, but I do miss that opportunity to play a direct role in the lives of our people and to work with them through this crisis. That's been the big change.
When you invited him to be the CEO or proposed him to the board to name him CEO, what are the half a dozen character traits, skill sets, experiences that you looked for in your analysis? You know how intimidating it is, Rich, for me to be interviewing a world-class interviewer? I'm trying to think through some intelligent questions, but I got to tell you, I sense your gravitas. But anyway, what are half a dozen of the traits you looked for before you risked your endorsement of him?
Yeah, I'll tell you, here's the number one trait we look for in a senior leader at Scripps: broad discernment. It's just...
So tell us what that means to you.
To us, broad discernment is that ability to stand back, look at the field very broadly, and make good decisions based on all the information that's available at the time. Broad discernment is in incredibly short supply. Too many high-achieving people are very narrow. They have very specific skill sets. They're very good at a few things. But that kind of just broad discernment, good, thoughtful decision-making is very incredibly hard to find. And at Scripps, we really value that. We think that over time, what really makes a great leader is that sort of broad, thoughtful decision-making.
So there's experiences that bring that.
Yeah,
Is there anything proactively that these amazing young adults could begin to
yeah,
do to assure that they're developing that broad discernment?
yeah. I think you have to make sure you're willing to put yourself in situations where you can help guide decision making that's a little bit probably outside your comfort zone. I mean, you really, really, if you want to be a leader, you cannot be a one-trick pony. You can't be the finest, some specific scientists or some specific technical expertise. Those are great, and you can go a long way with those. But if you want to be a leader, you got to be able to see the whole field. You have to be able to understand what people are thinking on the other side of the table, and that just good, broad discernment. All of you I know people who are very smart and they're really wacky decision makers. I mean, you just watch them and you think, how in the world did they reach that conclusion? They are brilliant. And it's because that broad discernment, you can look it up and read about discernment. It's decision making at a much higher level than just yes or no. So we look for broad discernment. I mean, if you look through the job description, broad discernment is right at the top. We also look at creativity. We're in a creative business, but every business, I think, today has a creative aspect to it, and we really value creativity. And that's the ability to just look at two things: look at an apple and an orange that are seemingly unrelated, and understand where there is some common overlap. You know, and again, that's hard to find as well. Good creativity. A lot of people are just too black and white, too narrow, and won't allow themselves to think creatively and broadly. We've really value creativity.
Let me interject here. You know, one of the things we talked about early on, and I endorse that as well. It's hard to be creative when you're waylaid with things in our lives that didn't get worked out, experiences, people, relationships, hardships, perhaps disease, setbacks, detours. And a lot of times we become our own worst enemy, and we shame ourselves constantly with our self-talk. So early on, and I think Nick Spone, guys, dealt with it the other day too. How do we assure that we are making room for that creative aspect of our personality?
I can tell you how I do it.
Please.
I'm a very good compartmentalizer, and I think you have to be a very good compartmentalizer. You probably all also know people who just can't separate themselves from the current issue or crisis or the one that they went through last year. Able to take something that's really difficult, put it in a box, and set it right here just for enough time so I can work through something else. I think good leaders, you've got to be able to do that. Otherwise, if you're carrying it all on your back all the time, you're just not going to be able to make it. So being able to compartmentalize, I think, makes a big difference.
I think that's an important, we've talked about that, gang. I'm talking to the class now for a few minutes. You just saw in Doris, which we were taught early on, about the importance of unpacking things that need to be unpacked. And if when does that start, and how do you do it, and the importance of getting help to do it. I wanted to emphasize that because I think that's eminently important. What about the arts? What role does music and art and color and woods and mountains? It sounds touchy-feely. It sounds like it may have come from DAP. Sorry, Sam. But how much does that play in really developing a creative spirit, if any?
I think it plays a big role. I'm not I'm a writer, really by trade is really what I am. All my years in corporate leadership, I wrote all my own stuff, wrote all my own speeches, all my own memos, anything that anybody was going to see, I prepared it myself. I love speech writing. I love writing for the eye and the ear. It's just so much fun. So to me, and I'm an outdoors person. I own 250 acres just 30 miles south of Cincinnati. I'm a tree farmer. I'm a hunter. I fish. I paddle a canoe. I love to go in the woods. Right now, I love to go in the woods and look at these trees that have been there through the First World War, the Second World War, the Depression, the virus, and everything else. And just a good reminder that there are many things that are consistent, many things that can be counted on. And these things that we work through over time can be taken care of. Yeah, I find a lot of comfort in that. I love music. I'm a I don't know if any of you are John Prine fans who
Oh
just
yeah,
died.
just passed away.
I like country music. I'm not much on classical music. Classical music in my family involved a banjo, and that's the way I like it today. But
So we were. Go
yeah, you
ahead. I'm
got to be
sorry.
able to. I would say I've worked with a lot of workaholics, and the other thing I would tell you, I think last time I spoke to this class, somebody asked me about work balance,
Yes.
and I'm afraid I'm just going to have to tell you that in many leadership positions, you're going to have to work really hard, and you may have to work a little longer than other people, and you may have a very unpredictable schedule. My poor sons, they can rattle off for you the times I had to go to the airport and leave a vacation, or times when I said at the last minute, I just can't go. It wasn't right. I'm really not sure now I did the right thing, but in many leadership positions, you're going to have to put up with some of that if you really want the job. I don't. And on top of that, a lot of us do an awful lot of things on the side,
Mm-hmm.
and that idea of a nice, clean work week, if you want to be a senior leader, I think it's just really hard to do. Because people do weird things on all kinds of schedules, and you have to deal with it.
Yeah, you talked last year along that work about the importance of self-sacrifice and just understanding early there's a price to be paid for that without any guarantee of an outcome. So
I think there is.
it's just the journey, it's the experience. So we were talking about the characteristics that you look for in your successors,
Oh, yeah.
and then leadership. We talked broad discernment. We talked the importance of creativity. We talked the importance of offloading crap that would weigh us down, and to learn to compartmentalize it, work-life balance or self-sacrifice. What other characteristics are prominent in your
We value
landscape?
entrepreneurism, somebody who has an entrepreneurial spirit. Scripps is a company Scripps is an incredible platform for entrepreneurs. Much like my friend Ken Lowe, it has supported and backed many entrepreneurs. So the CEO of Scripps has got to be entrepreneurial and willing to support entrepreneurs. That's absolutely. Two other things. One, we very much value mission. We really do still believe you can make the world a better place through free speech and through a free press. And we're very dedicated to making communities, whether they are physical or otherwise, better places, shining light into corners where otherwise people can hide and do terrible things. And so the CEO of Scripps can also be a financial whiz, but you've got to be mission-minded. You've got to be committed. You've got to believe we can make the world and communities better places.
So let me ask you why that's important. I mean, look at the emphasis he's putting on a mission-minded life, one that believes what you're doing is important to the world. Why is that so important? What does that do for you and your future leaders? To be mission-minded does what?
Well, because it works its way all the way through the organization. If you had an insincere corporate leader, we employ thousands of journalists. It's the same. My work at the Associated Press is the same. And if you're not mission dedicated at the top, people pick up on that very quickly, and that's what they do. Some of you may have been around journalists in your past. Journalists are a lot like teachers or missionaries. They don't get paid near what they should based on their education and experience. They really do believe they can make the world a better place, and the leader has got to be able to support that. We also do things that at times don't make sense. We send lawyers into court all over the country to battle for the rights of free speech, for open records. A few years ago, I was trying to recruit a fabulous woman executive from Procter & Gamble to come to Scripps, and she just really wasn't very interested. She called me one day, and we met at Starbucks and on 4th Street, and she said, I did a little research. You all sometimes send lawyers into court to defend people who are your sources, people who talk to you for whatever reason. You had no obligation, and you sent lawyers into court to support these sources. I said, yeah, we do that pretty much all the time. She said, well, I think I'm out of femcare and into your business. And it's that sort of, mission-driven organization where you attract talent, where you get 125% or 150% of what people have because of your dedication and sense of mission. So you absolutely got to have that. And then really the final thing we focus on at Scripps, you go down that list, you'll find there's not a hard skill in there. There's not a MBA. There's nothing like that. You have to be willing to build a very diverse team. Mm-hmm. So my team at Scripps, they were nothing like me. They had very different skills. They told me when I was messing up. And at Scripps, you got to be willing to run a very diverse team in order to let you do the things that you do extremely well. I'll give you an example. I have several, really terrible weaknesses. One is I'm terribly contrarian. And so if I'm leading a meeting and all of a sudden everybody's agreeing with me and we're all heading in one direction, I, like an idiot, turn and start arguing the opposite position. And it aggravates and pisses people off. And they say you have contrarian's disease. And I say, I know, and I'm trying to cure it, but it's really hard. But having that diverse team around me, they were able to call me on it and say, Rich, we're on board with what you want to do. Why are you now arguing the other position? And if I had just a bunch of yes people, we would have not made many of the decisions that we made all along the line. That's really important. And I'll tell you, just while we're talking, the other terrible weakness I have that I've tried to overcome, I grew up in a business where need praise. If you needed to be praised or thanked, you were weak. And you should know when you did a great job. And that's sort of what the news industry used to be like. So when I came into management, even senior management, I love the people who worked for me, and I was so proud of them, but I was not very good at sort of the old ring the bell when somebody hit the sales goal, and understanding the value of praise and support that some people thrive on and really have to have. I don't need it, but some people really do. And I've had to learn that and understand that some people thrive on that. And they'll go gain more yards for you if you're able to do it. But I've really had to coach myself on that. Contrarian and not very good initially at understanding how important it is to praise and thank people for the work they do.
So a hand in glove along with that is the importance of giving. The Maxwell, we use John Maxwell's material.
Yeah.
And you and I have both tried to demonstrate it with what we've got. Talk to us about the importance of leaders as givers, and what does that do for an organization? Because I know, by the way, most of you guys need to know that Rich and his wife and others have given millions now to NKU, the same place that kicked him out twice and made him sign a contract to get back in. I mean, the world is full of just some good karma and some good good irony there, but and we appreciate his generosity, whether it's NKU, Xavier, UC. He has touch points all around the city. Talk to us about the importance of leaders as givers and how to cultivate an abundance or a giving mentality, especially today.
Well, I guess I would come at it fairly simply. If you've been financially blessed, with either money resources or influence or whatever, if you've been blessed and you're unwilling to share that, I think we call that selfish. And if you're selfish, I can't imagine what kind of leader you really are. If you're selfish, I would think that would flow through to other kind of decisions that you would make. I've always looked at it like, I've earned much more than I ever dreamed I would, much more than I deserve, and much more than I need. I live a fairly comfortable, upper middle class kind of lifestyle, and have had the opportunity to bless a lot of other people with the money I've received that I really don't think I deserved.
Let me tell you something, because he won't tell you. One of the reasons that I am just really honored, it sounds pious, but I mean it sincerely, and I've talked about it since we got together in January, of having Rich with us, is because Rich can live anywhere in the city that he wants. Pick your neighborhood, pick your house. He can live anywhere in the United States he wants. Pick your city, pick your house. As he just described, he lives in Newport, which is a fairly middle-class town generally. The historic district is a little bit more professional and upper middle class as he described it. But he's chosen that lifestyle, he and his wife and his family, because I've watched him over the years, and he's a man who walks that talk. Now, that's not to vilify everybody in Indian Hill and Glendale or these places. There's some good people there and some very generous givers in the city who reside there. But I think it's a unique attribute to a major American corporation, major world leader in news, to adopt that lifestyle. And I think what you see is driving it is the fact that he feels like he has been blessed with more than he deserves, and there's a sense of social community responsibility to give back to others. And he won't say that, so I wanted to say it and give him honor, because I think that's important as well. He doesn't need it, but you all need to hear it, and I need to say it every year. So for what you've done there, Richard, thank you so much. My goodness.
Well, I hope you all, I know based on, your career track, you all are going to have opportunities to be very generous, and I hope you will. I'm surprised. I know a lot of really generous people. This city is full of generous people, but I know some people who don't give a penny to anything, and I'm just amazed. Cannot believe it. They must think that they're going to hide it in some body cavity and spend it in heaven or wherever they end up, because they're just as tight as can be. Really curious to me. And I hope you all will be generous. At NKU, and I assume at UC, we run student philanthropy programs where we teach the value of giving and community involvement. I really hope even today, many of you, I'm sure you are involved somewhere on campus or in the community where you have the opportunity to deal with people who have not been as blessed or fortunate as you have been. I mean, we're all not far from that place, right? I mean, and we're going to see it in the coming months, how close to the edge a number of our friends and neighbors were, and a lot of them are going to need our help over the coming months. And I hope you'll be generous.
You've used a term that's commonly heard in places of faith. I know a little bit about your background. Regardless of one's faith tradition, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, agnostic, atheist, whatever, I guess there's no faith tradition in atheism, but talk to us about the role that faith has played in your particular journey. We're not advocating, I want to be clear to everybody,
sure.
But we are exploring the importance of faith-based living. Rich?
Yeah, it makes a big difference to me. I don't have any doubt that that there's something going on above or around us that's out of my control. No question at all. I've seen the hand of whoever you might want to describe. No, no question at all. I happen to be I come out of a Christian tradition, focused on the red letters out of the New Testament. Love, faith, mercy, grace, and the power of those as you walk down the street each and every day. You can find those elements in any faith that you might belong to or be interested in, but those, love, mercy, and grace, incredibly powerful, and things that you can just sort of hand out at will as you walk down the street each day. They've made a big difference in my life. Today, my wife and I are members of a church some of you might know, very close to UC's campus, called People's, on William Howard Taft.
Yep.
And it's a congregation that's focused on racial reconciliation. Obviously, a very diverse and involved in an awful lot of race reconciliation efforts around the region. And it is a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. And I'm probably might be one of the only ones that wears a camo hat to a to a church function in Uptown. But that's who I am. When I come from Morning View, Kentucky, wearing boots and a camo hat, I seem to fit in just fine.
Not your typical Wall Street CEO, which is what we love about Rich. So, Rich, looking back, if you had to tell your 23-year-old self, give him some advice, and you only had an afternoon to do it, and you were going to check out forever, what advice would you give your 23-year-old self? A follow-up question to that is, you have some amazing kids and some creative kids and now grandchildren. What did they learn about being around this experience of yours growing up? What would you tell them? It's a multifaceted question. I apologize. I haven't distilled it. But let's start with, what would you tell your 23-year-old self?
Boy, what would I tell my 23-year-old self? I probably at 23 would have had a slight bit more confidence. Like many of you at 23, I thought that every decision might somehow be terminal, which was just a really silly. There's an awful lot of meandering and corrections and success ahead of you at 23, and to just sweat over every single decision. It didn't last that long for me, but I certainly did that. I think, what I've, really told my sons, one of my sons is a educated teacher at the children's home in Cincinnati. And before that, he was a teacher at the Lighthouse School that's now operated by Cincinnati Public. He graduated from Northern Kentucky University and is working on his master's degree at University of Cincinnati. My other son is a graduate, went to Highlands, went to Vanderbilt University, and came out. I thought he was probably going to go on be a PhD in counseling, and he quickly fell in love with being more of an entrepreneur. So now he's buying property in Northside and other places. Looks at me and says, "Dad, I just don't want to do what you did. I don't want to go to work in the tall building every day." And he's building his own portfolio and doing great. But I think at 23, well, the one thing I learned a little later that I wish I had done it starting at 23 was always sort of thinking 5 years out, not 1 year out. If you kind of think further out all the time, it really changes the way you make decisions. I think too many people and too many young people are just so focused on short term. If you think out 5 years and always thinking about, how do I increase my choices? So through most of my career, I always thought about, how do I have more choices in 5 years than I have today? Quite often that meant that I had to trade off short-term success for what would long-term be more choices and opportunity that ultimately turned into much greater success. So a lot of my friends said, nah, I think I just, I got to go this way right now. I got to stay where I am. And I always was willing to move around to increase my choices, usually sort of thinking 5 years out. Does that make sense? How do you increase your choices? I always tell my sons there's nothing worse than only having one choice. And for example, if that choice is to just stay in the job you have, you've kind of haven't done a good job over the recent years of spreading out your choices and opportunities, understanding that you have to trade away things in the short term to increase that playing field 5 years out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's good counsel as well. And what you're telling the boys as well is increase your field of choices and make decisions today that allows you to pursue life in a more diversified way in the future. Let me get to a couple of the questions real quick, because
Sure.
there's several of them coming in, and I think you may have answered some of them. But was there a situation, a network, a project, an initiative that you pushed that failed? How do you regain credibility and work around that after
Oh, yeah.
it's been a public failure?
Oh, yeah. I've had a bunch of those. First and most important thing to do is say, I screwed up. We made a mistake, and here's what we need to do to clean it up and make it right. Take all the blame. Don't blame it on, never blame it on your subordinates, even if they're the ones that did it. One of the things I've always thought so important as a leader, if you're the leader, you eat it. And if you make a bad decision, or somewhere in your organization, people make bad decisions, you stand there and eat it. I mean, that's your job. That's why you've got the big job. So what's most important, and so disarming, it's so easy to be disarming if you're open and honest and and willing to say, we messed up. Here's what we're going to do to clean it up. Here's what we're going to do to correct it. If you want to punish me, you can. You'd have every right. From taking away my bonus, cutting my pay, to telling me I got to put my stuff in a box and leave. That's your decision. But we messed up. Here's how it happened. Here's what we're going to do to make it right. So many people can't do it. I've worked with so many people, and when it came down to it, when they were standing in front of the board or standing somewhere else, they had to blame it on somebody else, or they had to, at the very least, find somebody to share the blame when they should have just stood there and eat it because it was their job. I think that's really, really important. People who try to dance around it, avoid it, blame it on somebody else, never works out. It's so disarming if you just say, we messed up and I'm sorry, here's what we're going to do to clean it up. It's really hard, to push back after somebody does that.
Terrific answer. Another one that asks, what advice would you have on those who there's engineering degrees, most everybody in the class, some other degrees, who want to start their own business? Where do you start, and how do you do it in the current financial environment?
Well, boy, and the current financial environment is one we don't even know yet. I mean, we don't know what the impact is going to be, how long it's going to be difficult. Well, I would tell you two things. One, just very practical. There are wonderful, I do a lot of work with the entrepreneur networks here in town, Centrifuge, Cincy Tech, Kinetic across the river. There are wonderful entrepreneur networks. There's great entrepreneur support. If you're really interested in starting your own business, you have a very good support network for students who want to be entrepreneurs and own their own business. It's something that can be learned and understood. And if you have an idea or you just think you can build your own engineering firm, I really encourage you to tap these networks, take advantage of them, and let them help you. There's a lot of help available. There's also money available. There are a lot of good angel investors that even through these economic times are going to be willing to bet on entrepreneurs. And all this is knowable. It's all incredibly knowable. If you're wandering around campus thinking, how could I ever start a business? I have a great idea. I want to assure you there is help out there at UC, around the region, plenty of good people whole bunch of us out there who work with entrepreneurs and are more than happy to hear your story. The other thing I would say is, I don't want this to sound wrong or insensitive, but we're in the middle of chaos caused by an incredible crisis worldwide. There's going to be so much opportunity, screaming opportunity. It's there today as your generation tries to help us navigate. I'd like to think this is going to go away very quickly. It's probably not. And in all likelihood, our lives are going to be different in the future. And your generation is going to get to define what that is like. I would think for engineers, there's just going to be so much opportunity from what structures have to be like in the future to how people are going to gather together. How are they going to work together? All that on top of just the medical opportunities that are arising from this. This is probably, we'll look back in 50 years and incredible companies will be built out of this chaos starting over the next few months. Huge opportunity for you all.
Wow. Did you guys hear that? For those of you who want to do something else, he didn't talk about the next few years. He didn't talk about Christmas. It's April, and he said by the time the trees that are budding today turn colors, there'll be incredible opportunities and incredible companies birthed as a result of this crisis.
I think we're seeing. I'm seeing and hearing pitches from people now. A lot of it has to do very closely to how we deal with the virus, but the implications are going to be really broad. I can guarantee you some of the most incredible companies in the world are going to be birthed over the next few months to few years as we work our way through this. This is really a stunning period in your all's lives.
What about that person that's pursued engineering? And some are coming in on my text, by the way. I'm reading them in chat as well, but the name does show up in chat. But what about some of these that have selected engineering? They've invested half a decade, but now they want to do something entirely different, maybe in an entirely different field. And they're scared to death they're going to disappoint, scared to death it's not going to work. What advice do you give to those engineers who want to be teachers, engineers who want to start business, engineers who want to be firefighters or politicians? What advice do you have, Rich, for those guys?
Well, I'll tell you, my family always thought I would be an engineer. I had very good math skills. I had good skills around spatial relationships, and my family, they always thought I would be the engineer, and then I wanted to be a journalist. And my math abilities definitely helped me in my career, but I didn't end up an engineer, which they thought was probably the best way to go. From what I know of engineers, you have incredible abilities around method and methodical approach for us and for problem solving, and those things will take you far in almost any profession. It sounds to me like you have an awfully good foundation. You probably just need to commit yourself to making a list of 20, 25 people you need to talk to over the coming months to say, here's who I am, here's what I would like to do, here's what skill set I have. Give me some advice on where you think those opportunities are. How can I end up being a high school teacher or a social worker or whatever else? Be whatever you want to be. Please don't make the mistake of spending the next 10 years doing something you don't want to do.
Right. So one of the questions is very similar. If you're in a company where you don't feel they're transparent, the mission might not line up with your own, do you talk to them, try to make it work, or do you put in your notice?
I think you do a little bit of both. Certainly, it's a good idea to talk to those around you, but it's not always a fit. I had a former student from a school. I'll tell you, a former NKU student who was a very attractive grad, got a very good job very quickly. And he'd been a real activist on campus, been all kinds of things, very successful. he immediately was disturbed because he couldn't be the same activist inside the company that he joined. And I think he really just didn't understand that that's not necessarily the role of a corporation. No, you're probably not going to convince a corporation to back certain causes. You have all kinds of customers, you support all kinds of causes in many cases, and you can't just put your list down on the desk and expect a corporation to bend to whatever your interests might be. He was kind of stunned by it and initially hurt, felt that he was being discriminated against. I spent some time and worked with him. I said, I don't think it's a good fit. The nature of what they do doesn't seem to be a place where political activists, for example, are, it's just not going to be a good way to spend your time daily. I counseled him to take the deal and go. And he's in a different company now, and he's doing really well. But I think it was part of a hard transition for him from the success he had on campus to what it's like working inside of a large for-profit organization.
So we live in a time where there's a big mistrust of the media. It seems like all the outlets are polarized. There's political bias. Do you agree with that? And if so, how do we get back to trustworthy media, whether it's print or newsy or major network TV?
Sure, a couple things. So if you go back to prior to the 1980s, for example, media was most cities had 3 or 4 newspapers. One was Republican, one was a Democrat, occasionally one was socialist. You had an African American newspaper, some had a German newspaper, and they looked at the world through very different lenses. And then you went through a period when Greg and I grew up together, when most media just sort of sat comfortably in the middle. And the reason for that was there wasn't that much media and there weren't that many choices. You had 3 networks, 3 big news organizations, plus your local newspapers. And then the explosion happened, thanks to the digital revolution. And today, everybody's a publisher. Everybody has free speech. It's remarkable to think we're living through a time when free speech is freer than it has ever been in human history. There's never been a period like this. When I was the editor of a newspaper, if you had something you thought the community needed to know, you came and you sat in my office and you begged. You begged us to do a story on what you were involved with. And if we wouldn't do it, you were screwed. People wouldn't know. Today, that's just so absurd. You can build your own communications network. Social media can overtake much of the barriers that were there before. So, now we're in a time when, everybody has a point of view. Everybody sinks into their place of comfort. The one thing that many years of media research tells you, this is really fascinating. What people believe is true is what they agree with. And lots of research over many years bears that out. What people believe is true happens to be what they agree with. And unfortunately, I don't think that will ever change. And we see that today so much. If you want to navigate well today, what I would advise is, you got people talk all the time. I mean, people come up to me in Kroger and want to complain about CNN, MSNBC, Fox, occasionally ABC or usually NBC. And and I just say what you're looking at is the tiny tip of the iceberg in the world of media. If you put all their audiences together, it's not that terribly large. If you really want to look at where stories are generated and where it starts, look at the AP, look at the Wall Street Journal, probably the New York Times, the Financial Times of London, the Economist, the BBC, bbc.com, if you're looking at the world, NPR. These are the places where the real content in the news is generated. Everybody else just talks about it all the time. So I doubt any time in our lifetime we will see things move back to when Walter Cronkite talked with such a comforting voice to all of America, or took his glasses off and cried when the astronauts walked on the moon. Today, if somebody walked on the moon, you'd have one network saying it's really not happening. We all know it's fake, right? And it's some sort of conspiracy, either by the right or the left. And you'd have those that are just playing patriotic music and waving flags as the astronauts. It'd just be all over the spectrum, plus what's happening on social media. And I think that's the new reality. That's the cost of us living in a world where free speech is freer than it's ever been in human history. It's really dang messy, and sometimes it's profane, and it's extremely ugly at times, but it sure beats the alternative, which is just a few controlling the flow of information and having a way to preempt what goes out. So I'm not sure we're going to get out of this phase for the rest of our lifetimes, but I would really encourage you to look at some of the sources that generate a lot of the real content and news. There's some great organizations out there.
Thank you for that. One of
Can
our
I say one other thing?
Yeah, absolutely, go.
In case anybody thinks there is no broad conspiracy. I love it when I speak places and people go into this 10-minute rant about they think there are 3 or 4 people in New York who are controlling all the media in the world. That could not be further from the truth. Our industry is diverse, it's confused. Quite often decisions are made way down the line. I can tell you in the 50 cities we represent, the decisions are made by local newsrooms. Quite often at the New York Times, decisions are probably made by interns on Saturday night. And it's just incredibly diverse, and there's no broad conspiracy. Our industry is chaotic and competitive.
That's such a cool answer. How do you give and take constructive criticism of, as a leader? And when you get to that C-suite, what are the most effective ways to begin to deal with others, either giving constructive feedback or receiving it? Comment on that. Good question, Alex.
Well, receiving it, I've not necessarily thought of myself this way, but my board members and others have always said, you're a great listener. I guess I am always willing to sit and give up that impulse to jump in because, I'm the boss. Why should I sit and put up with this? But if you really sit and listen, and try to understand what people are saying, it makes a big difference. So I think receiving it, well, one, you're obligated to receive criticism because you wanted the job, right? It's your job to take the criticism. And being a great listener, I think, makes a big difference. Giving constructive criticism is always difficult. And I think the way to do it is open and honest and with appreciation that the person you're talking to, in all likelihood, did not have bad motives. In all likelihood, they're doing what they think is right. And somehow there just needs to be some correction or guidance that's to be done. Just being open, honest, empathetic, and remember, if you really look around, and especially in our environment in this country today, not that many people have lousy motives, and most of the things they do, a lot of it they do without intention. And if we would just give people the benefit of the doubt a little more, benefit of the doubt is in such short supply in this country today, it's almost disturbing. Just give people the benefit of the doubt and believe that their motives are probably pure. Start there and then work backward, and things will work a little bit better.
What a great answer. Somebody texted in here on my phone, ask Rich to talk about his mindset of failure. Tell us a little bit more about that question, how far can you fall? I think we dealt with that a little bit earlier in the day or in the evening, but this listener is wanting to get a little bit more insight. Thoughts?
Well, a couple. One, I really think as a leader, risk of failure and using failure to your benefit is an absolute requirement. I just don't know any leaders who don't at times fail. It's just it's such an exposed position. It just happens. I just think failure is so powerful. It's not only humbling, but it's I give you just a couple examples. We bought a business. I championed it. We paid $500 million for a digital business, and it was an early sort of helping you find products, and it was before search had really rolled out the way it has. So we had this kind of search product business, and one of the questions we had going in was, well, what if the search engines become powerful? And at the time, there were 5 or 6 search engines, and we said, well, none of them could ever have dominant market share. I mean, there's no barriers to entry. None of them can ever corner the market. There'll always be Google and Yahoo and all the others out there. And over time, Google ended up with like 75% market share of search, and really put a squeeze on a lot of these other sort of search and indexing businesses, and that ultimately killed our business. It's a subject of, sometimes I do grad student MBA classes working through these things, and this is one of the examples. How could you have missed that Google could clobber your business? I said, well, never in business history had there been a business with no barriers to entry, gained 75% market share, and dominate it, and eliminate our opportunity. And in that case, I had to write off $500 million, or almost that. It was very painful, but but we all learned a lot from the failure. When I think I've told you, Greg, when I have some young managers, we have some new young managers in the company today that I talk to, and I had one person who really wanted this more senior job not too long ago. One of the things I said is, I just haven't seen you fail. And the person was just disgusted by that. Is you wishing that I'm going to fail? And, that's just a strange thing to say. I said, yeah, but I just don't know if you're sturdy. I just haven't seen you have to recover and regroup. And I wish I had seen you work through some more difficult situations before we put you in that position. It's all sort of been rainbows and beautiful days for you, and I just don't know if you're sturdy enough. So I think that's a real example of, you want to see how people handle failure, and do they use it to their advantage. But I just think, man, I like people who have failed. I love people who needed second and third and fourth chances. They're just different kinds of different kinds of colleagues than you get with people who have never experienced any failure.
That's so encouraging, because I think failure is one of the things that's least taught in a leadership class, or even addressed. And you have taught us so much about the beauty, the value, the end result of just a good fail. And so many times we get, we want to avoid it. There's failure avoidance, and yeah, that's
really, I mean, I would encourage all of you to spend some time looking at, well, how far could I really fall? I mean, it's one thing to say, I'm going to fall through the barrier of embarrassment. I might have to sell my BMW, and we might have to sell the big house we just bought, or the next house we bought, and it's going to be embarrassing. People are going to know, that you got to be willing to fall through that barrier. Every one of you, if you're going to risk failure, a little bit of embarrassment, that's part of the price. But are you really going to fall to where you're living on the streets and you can't feed your kids? And that's so highly unlikely, based on the backgrounds and the education, the opportunities that you all have had. So just, set reasonable expectations, and be willing to drop back once in a while, and don't worry about the embarrassment.
Who's one of the most fascinating people you've ever met, one or two, and why did they intrigue you so? Somebody writes.
Boy, gosh, intriguing. I think one of my favorites, and now he sounds just really old and out of the picture, is Jimmy Carter. I'm not sure he was a great president. Most many people would say he wasn't, but very incredibly mission-minded. He went through a terrible, terrible crisis, two of them in his presidency. One was when oil prices changed and threw the country into economic recession. Not much he could do about it, but he was the leader and he had to swallow that. And the other was the takeover of the Iranian embassy in Tehran. And I just admired the way he worked through those two situations. He then lost to Ronald Reagan in the next election, and then went on to have a great life. His life was not defined by his failures. It was really defined by what he did with them and the way he put them to use later in life. I've met him several times and have always really enjoyed him as a leader. The other thing I would tell you about Fascinating People, we used to play a game in the newsroom, and many newsrooms still play it, called Everybody Has a Story. And so you would take out a phone book and flip the pages, and somebody, without looking, would put their finger on a name in a phone book, and we would assign somebody to go knock on that door and write a story about that person or who lived in that house. And I think what I found through that, through knocking on doors and meeting just all kinds of people in all kinds of neighborhoods, there's so many fascinating people. And it's really true. Everybody has a story. And we're just surrounded by incredible characters and fine people. But if you don't seek them out, if you really just look at the few people at the top of the pyramid, you'll miss an awful lot of the really great people that are kind of down the street, sitting in the corners, different kind of places. But everybody really does have a story.
I think you guys can tell at this point why Rich and his wife are so beloved by so many. He's just got that sense of realness, of authenticity, which I think is rare, oftentimes today.
Can I tell you what?
Yeah, absolutely. Go.
And I have had the opportunity to. I think I've met every president, but I not too long ago spent a whole evening with Bill Clinton at a dinner in D.C. I had a great opportunity to spend time with Barack Obama in Cincinnati underneath a bridge. I don't know if some of you might remember, he was here for a rally.
Yeah, I was there. That was awesome.
And I was chair of the Regional Chamber of Commerce at the time. And we were sort of pushing an infrastructure support. We have a terrible bridge problem here on I-75, as some of you might know. So as head of the chamber, I got elected to go talk to the president. So he had done that rally, and we sat down under the bridge there in his tent and had just a really nice talk. One of the things he said was, "I sure wish I had a job like yours where people would do what you say." And I said, it's not always like that, Mr. President. I agree you got a tough job, but I've interviewed and met a lot of presidents, because of my business, a lot of Hollywood and music. Quickly, what you figure out, if you really get to know a lot of them, they've all got insecurities. They've certainly all got flaws. I spent the early part of my career interviewing a lot of CEOs of large companies when I covered Wall Street, and they were all regular people scared to death for the most part, hoping they made the right decisions. Very few of them had some just sort of 100% command of what they did.
You said something about that experience some years ago that stuck with me. You said nobody wanted the business beat, and I learned a whole lot about business by interviewing business guys and gals.
Yeah, it was a great. Nobody wanted to cover business, and I thought, well, that meant there was probably a fair amount of opportunity for some reason, and it turned out it really was.
Fascinating. And somebody else asks, what are you reading these days, and what are your favorite books?
Let's see, what am I reading these days? I'm reading, one of my favorite authors is Wendell Berry. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Wendell Berry. He's writes fiction and poetry. He's a very socially radical farmer from Henry County, Kentucky. you would see his essays in the New York Times and a number of places. Talks a lot about the value of small community and the importance of continuity in small communities, however you define community. Great writer. Check out some Wendell Berry.
B-A or B-E-R-R?
B-E-R-R-Y.
Thank you.
I started by reading his poetry. I like poetry because as a writer, I love sense and pace. And poetry often is really good learning for those of you who like to write. And hopefully you will learn to write. The other, look across the desk here, one of my favorite books of all time is Against the Gods, written by Peter Bernstein. It's a look, it's a history of risk analysis all the way through human history. So he goes through, and even though it says Against the Gods, it's not a book about faith at all. It's really just about how, until in very recent years, it was very difficult for humans to assess risk. If you think about it scientifically, mathematically, through most of human history, you just sort of looked up at the sky and wondered what was going to happen. And only in recent years has risk analysis become much tighter. It's a great book. One of our board members says, "You really like reading books about risk analysis?" I say, "Yeah, when it's got as much story as Against the Gods does. It's really, really good." So I read that. I read a lot of, I read very few hardcore business books. I did read Good to Great. Everybody read Good to Great, and it's good. But so many business books I find just so incredibly formulaic and cliche. And then each meeting you go to, people have adopted the new buzzwords from the new hot business book, and I just find all of it kind of sickening. So I've got stacks of them that people send me, and I look at a few here and there, but not that terribly much. So I tend to read, like I said, I'll read stuff about economics and risk that has a little more of a story. I read a lot of fiction, I read poetry, and I just don't read that many business books.
Somebody wrote, what is the one question we should constantly be asking ourselves?
I think the one question you need to constantly ask yourself is, who are you really? I'll tell you, it's just pretty hard to fake it over long periods of time. And if you get into a position of leadership and you had to fake it to get there, it's going to be really hard because people can see through you. I would really encourage you to be who you are as you develop your career. It might come with some short-term trade-offs and pain, but by mid-career, you'll be so happy that you're really who you are. Not ashamed. And let that and build your brand around just who you are. Like I say, I've always been so comfortable with who I am. I don't like a company. I always tell people I don't look good in the clothes, but I don't like golf. I don't like country clubs. I like fish and trees and streams and canoes and things like that. And it's never held me back. There was a period when I did a lot of the morning and afternoon market shows on the networks, and one of the folks that worked at Scripps said, "Well, yeah, they like your whole Kentucky routine." I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, they like your whole Kentucky routine. You use examples like porch swings, and they all find that entertaining. That's why you keep getting these invitations." And I was kind of, I didn't know whether to be stunned or what, but apparently the CEO from Kentucky provided good diversity on the afternoon market shows.
That's terrific. So we're not going to hijack Rich's whole evening, although he's been very generous for the last 2.5 hours. I'm going to open it up, and here's what I want to do. If you have a question that hasn't been asked, I'll give everybody, because we've still got everybody but about 3% of the original high audience with us. 125 people out of 133. But if you have a question you'd like to ask Rich, this is a chance for you to do it with a real live, real time, for real CEO. And but if you ask one question, then mute your mic and let somebody else have a little space. So again, for the next few minutes, we'll entertain a few questions. Just unmute your mic and ask the question. Anybody, any takers on that?
Yeah, I can ask a quick question.
David, speak up a little bit. I'm finding it hard to hear you. I'm not sure. Are the rest of you finding it hard to hear David? Give him a thumbs up if he's hard to hear. So David, check your volume there and your speakers, and then feel free.
Okay, is that any better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, thank you so much for the information. It's been great taking so many notes. But I think the question I have for you is, when you feel like you failed or you're almost even at rock bottom, how do you kind of take stock of what you have and take a look around you and say, all right, here's kind of what I have. Here's what I have around me, the opportunities, and then being able to move forward and make the most of what you have around you, even after you've failed or feel like you're at rock bottom or whatever.
Yeah, well, I think most important is to do that honestly, because most of us, if we look around us, we actually have quite a lot. So for me, that started with, I'm healthy, my family's healthy, you know, the reasonable opportunities. If you approach that from a, you know, sort of working from expectations as opposed to what opportunities and what assets you really have around you, I think it's very hard to do. If you just be real honest, most of you, you know, most of us, if we fail, we've got a really good network and safety net around us, and we're not going to go hungry, and our families are not going to go hungry either. Just be real honest about it, and don't set too high of expectations.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Rich. I apologize.
I've almost never applied for a job. Almost all opportunities came my way along the way. You know, I've taken myself out of jobs and accepted other opportunities, but and I've been fired. I have been asked to put myself in a box and go home, and then, you know, I was okay with that. Wasn't fun, but
part of the experience to makes you who you are. Thanks, David. Great question. Somebody else. All you have to do is unmute the mic. Go ahead, Ryan.
Hey, Rich. How you doing? Thanks
Good.
thanks for joining us tonight. Really appreciate your time. I had a question. So you talked a lot about just making connections at work and making sure you have that like close group of people around you who you can really trust. And I was just curious, have you found that is difficult to do being in leadership positions? Because I'm thinking, like, as you move higher up and take on more responsibility, maybe just the relationship dynamics change.
Yeah.
Maybe if you want to speak into that.
That's saying people, if they move up the chain, they leave people behind. And I have really done my very best not to do that. So I have I'm very close with professional colleagues who are way down in the ranks. That's what they like to do, and they stay there, and we're still very close, and they're very open with me. There's a person who works at Scripps. We've worked together for 30 plus years, and he used to come to my office and say, okay, I guess I'm the one that's got to tell you what people are really thinking. And certainly in many organizations, that person would not go to the CEO's office and explain things the way they're really going down. But but man, don't ever leave people behind. I think that's just rude to start with. People who are good friends and who you value in your life, you know, you can't buy them. I mean, I would never leave them behind. I'd make sure and make them a part of your decision-making structure around you.
Great question, Ryan. Good answer, Rich. Somebody else.
Yeah, hey there. Rich, thank you so much for talking. You spoke a lot about the importance of being true to yourself, finding what you're passionate about and going after that. That if you aren't doing something you're driven towards doing, if you aren't oriented on a goal, then you're not going to succeed. I think that's really true. That's the first step in escaping like nihilism, escaping a life of meaninglessness, is finding something to go after. How do you find that? How did you know like what you were passionate about? How do you get in tune with the thing that is most important to you?
Sure. To start with, are you in a garage? Where are you guys?
we're in a basement right now.
Under a pier?
No, the best place in my house is to be away from everyone, so that is the basement for me.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Way to go, Luke.
Yeah, I need some of that paint that's just behind you to touch up my fence.
It would be worth it, Luke, to offer the paint and do it for free if you're gonna hang out with him. But anyway, back to the question, Rich.
So like I said, I wanted to be a journalist, right? And that's what I really wanted to be. But I was also willing to sort of look at it a little more broadly and say I like to be part of an adventure. And so I would have never dreamed that I would be in management. I had no aspirations to be in management. I just want to be a great journalist. But I sort of was willing to meander a little bit and explore other things. And as I did, I found other opportunities that really satisfied my need for adventure and stimulation. But they weren't necessarily being the journalist that I had started out to be. So I think it's real important to be willing to detour a little bit, to meander a little bit, add experiences, and spread yourself out and not be just too determined to be on some linear track. You're young. I mean, take some chances.
That right there is powerful. Somebody else. We're only taking a few minutes, but go ahead and feel free. This is a great opportunity to call a CEO by his first name and ask for some great advice by a terrifically successful man. Anybody else? Last chance.
Yeah, Rich, I got a question.
Travis, go ahead.
One of the quotes that have stuck with me the most from this class so far is, don't let your what ifs turn into if onlys. Do you have any good examples of where you maybe look back on something and wish like you would have done it differently?
Boy, what would I wish I had done differently? Boy, what ifs? I'll tell you that is a tough one for me. I really have not had too many what ifs that turned into if only
regrets. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have too many regrets. I guess what would be an example? I don't know. Every once in a while, I've had a great career, without question. It's been fun. It's been a great adventure. But occasionally I do look and see somebody who has been a great journalist or a great photographer, and I'm thinking, what if I had just stayed more narrowly, and might I have enjoyed that career more? But I don't have many what ifs.
Sounds like a great theme
really
for a
don't.
Frank Sinatra song.
Yeah. I'm about as dumb lucky as they come. I really don't have many. I don't have many regrets.
All right, thanks. I appreciate that. I think that kind of speaks volumes about the quote, just, saying that, you don't have many regrets, and, look how successful that you've been, that you've, gone after everything that you wanted.
Yeah, that's so true, Travis. I appreciate that insight. Go ahead, Rich.
I just you asked me about my sons and the advice I gave my sons. One of the advice I gave my sons, I set them down individually. They were 16, 17, and said, there are many definitions of success, and feel no obligation, no pressure to repeat the pattern of your parents' lives. And I've done everything I could, because they had to grow up with a father who was in the public eye, to help them find their own definitions of success. And I told them in the same setting, I said, look, if you choose to live in a box under a bridge, I'll be incredibly supportive as long as you do it by choice. If you have lots of choices and you choose to live in a box under the bridge, that's fine with me. So I really then impressed on them the whole way through. There's so many definitions of success. Don't just look to mine or others that are imposed on you. Don't feel under any obligation to repeat the pattern of your parents' lives. And just have choices. And as long as you do things by choice, I'm supportive. I mean, those were very real conversations I had with my sons. And occasionally my wife says, oh yeah, now look what they went and did. You shouldn't have told them all that. But I'm very proud of them because they have really lived that out. They didn't feel any obligation to repeat the pattern of my life, or my definition of success.
Find your own definition of success. To
Yeah.
thine own self be true. It's ancient truth.
Yeah.
And follow your arrow. I want to take just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and ring the bell. Rich, guys, listen, and ladies, you can't buy time like this. To sit with a major American corporation CEO and just have this kind of experience for 3 hours is amazing. And I've always said it's not about, the class is not so cool because I had anything to do with it. It's what we create here. And this is part of what we've created here, is to bring you face to face from someone that is highly admired. And, he's been from the top to the bottom, literally. And if you can't learn anything about these 3 hours or 2 hours and 45 minutes that we've spent together tonight, you and I need to have a talk, because they're like others there. I've taken pages of notes, do it every year. He always enthuses, you always sharpen my saw, and you inspire us all, Rich. And for what you've done for the community and for what is yet to be accomplished by you and your wife, we give you thanks in advance.
Can I leave them with one thing?
You sure can.
I listen, you all, I am not kidding. You are sitting at a point in history when there's just convulsion in the world and in culture and in life, and the opportunities that await you guys. I mean, this is a moment. This is a real moment, and I hope you make the most of them for the betterment of all the people who are around you. You're a blessed bunch in a lot of ways.
Absolutely, and they're a wonderful bunch, and I would walk over hot coals to help them succeed. Rich, you have helped them succeed tonight. You've inspired, you've motivated, you've informed. And the tagline for Scripps is what? About light and people and following.
Give light and people will find their own way.
Give light and people will find their own way. That's what Rich has personified tonight. And we'll be in touch, my friend. Blessings on you and your family. Thank you for your generous spirit. And you're loved and appreciated. Gang, thank you again. Appreciate you hanging with us. And we are done. I'll be the last one out of the room.
We really appreciate it, Rich.